going on, and for joining us for this for our full meeting of the task force. We have an exciting meeting this morning. I'm really thrilled that we are going to be hearing from all of our committees about the work that they've been doing. We're going to have a chance, and one of my goals for this meeting is that everyone participating has their voice heard, that we have a discussion that gets your impressions on what we've achieved so far and really where you'd like to see us going, which is just to set the stage for a broader strategic planning that we are going to engage in going forward. But it's if you're here thinking you can just listen, no, at some point you're going to have to talk because we really want to get everyone's input. And then most exciting as well is the fact that we are going to be joined. We will have our public comment session, and then concluding that, we will have we'll be joined by Dr. Ana Yanez Correa, who is director of the Harris County Justice Administration Department. So she is in Texas working on issues of racial justice in the criminal justice system, and is going to share with us what they are doing there, which I think will be really inspiring and encouraging. So that's what we have coming up this morning. And I do want to give at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Attorney General Stein, to introduce some of our new members and for any welcoming comments.
Thank you. Apologize for being a minute or two late. My Zoom on my computer just is not what it used to be, so I apologize. It is a pleasure for me to welcome two new members to our task force. We've got Sheriff Burkhead, Clarence Burkhead of Durham. Sheriff comes with 30 years of law enforcement experience, having been a deputy sheriff, Duke University Police. He was chief of police in Hillsborough, and already in our working groups has made a number of really important contributions. And so, Sheriff Burkhead, if you are on and your computer's working better than mine, do you want to say a word?
He actually just texted me and said he's having trouble finding his link. So trying to get him online now, and maybe we could circle back to him. Okay, great. Well, we also have Chief Gina Hawkins of Fayetteville. Chief Hawkins has also nearly 30 years of law enforcement experience, has been a great partner to the Department of Justice on a number of fronts, not only these criminal justice reform issues, but on opioids and sexual assault kits. And she is a real leader in law enforcement in North Carolina. I do see Chief Hawkins. Do you want to say a word this morning, Chief?
Sir, Attorney General, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this task force right now in our time. I think it's definitely an honor to bring together all the ideas of this movement and change. So I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. We look forward to your continued participation. You too have already been adding a great deal of value to our work. And I just want to say a personal word about our former colleague, Sheriff James Clemens. Sheriff Clemens was a wonderful, wonderful human being and a wonderful representative of law enforcement. He was a friend who did this work, did the work of law enforcement because he genuinely cares about people as people and wanted to try to help people live better lives and, of course, have safe communities, and was just a tremendous individual. And so obviously, we miss him from our work here on the task force, but much more importantly, we miss his presence and the service that he provided to the people of North Carolina. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity.
Attorney General Stein, I think Sheriff Burkhead is here now.
Hey, Sheriff Burkhead. I had trouble logging in. I don't know if you did too, but if you're here and already said what a great career you've had and the help you've already provided to our work, and wanted to see if you wanted to say a word to the fellow task force members.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Attorney General and other task force members. I'll just simply say what an honor it is for me to be part of this great group. I'm looking forward to doing the very necessary work as we evaluate criminal justice in our system here in North Carolina. And again, I'm happy to serve and represent Durham County. Thank you.
Sheriff, we welcome you and look forward to your continued good work. In addition to the new members, I wanted to alert everybody that we have an upcoming TREC session. It's our 4th learning series session on substance use as a public health crisis. And this is going to be on October 20th at 6 p.m. And we have a really great panel of participants. Chase Holloman, who works in Guilford County, GC Stop, as the program director there, wonderful young guy. Major Elijah Bazemore from Durham Jail, MAT, Durham County Sheriff's Office. Thank you, Sheriff Burkhead. Chief Mike Yanero, Jacksonville PD, former head of the Association of Chiefs of Police, and has been very forward-looking on issues involving substance use. Courtney Lytle, Operations Director, and Sue Polston, Executive Director of Sunrise Asheville. And Margaret Bordeaux, she is a justice-involved overdose prevention specialist at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So again, that's October 20th at 6 p.m. And the session is entitled Substance Use as a Public Health Crisis. We will certainly be sending out emails with more information about it, but I wanted to at least put that on your radar. And I think that's it. Justice Earls, back to you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to jump right into hearing from the committees that have been working, and that we're just going to go in numerical order. So that means we're going to start with committee number 1, the Executive Branch Action Committee. And Sergeant Garden, I think you are up to talk first.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everybody is prepared to have a great weekend. I am up to talk first, and I'll give you a quick rundown on the executive committee portion of the task force. As you know, the executive committee was, much like the other committees, was given a list of task force recommendations to kind of try to push forward. The 2 that you're going to hear from today are going to be we actually took our list of recommendations, broke them down into what was called buckets. And the 2 you'll hear about today are going to be the commission bucket and then the training bucket as well. And so I'll cover the commission part of it. And then Jasmine's going to come in and finish up the training portion as far as the update for the entire committee. I think it's important to note that the TREC task force and more importantly, the executive committee that we're with here has no influence or power to push the commission into doing anything. But I would like to thank the commission for its collaboration with the TREC task force. It's been a pleasure to kind of present to them the recommendations that TREC has put out, and they have wholeheartedly taken a positive step into actually listening and more importantly, willing to collaborate to try to get some of these things into place. So we'll get started. Commission updates. We broke it down into 3 basic areas for which we wanted the commission to kind of look at things. If you see the slide there, you'll see the areas where the administrative code, policy, and then best practices as it related to a number of things. As far as administrative code went, we asked the commission to kind of look at some of the language changes and maybe adding some things. And one of them was an addition to 3I of the administrative code to add the language that officers are not to engage in excessive force or unjustified use of force or abuse of power of the position. And that's a common thought, but we thought it was important to at least ask that we add that language in so nobody's that wondering where the commission stands as it relates to the abuse of power and excessive force. We asked for an amendment as it related to repeat psych evals, and that's under evaluation and consideration. And there's a whole process going on trying to figure out how to implement that and when to implement it and the type of psych eval to use as well. A lot of discussion behind it. A lot of there's a lot of unknown things that have to kind of be found out before that one can kind of go into place. And then we were asked to add an 8F there to require notification by both officer and agency of specific uses of force incidents, especially the ones that result into the serious bodily injury or the use of deadly force. And then the data collection part is TREC recommendation 53, and consistency within the code, which you'll hear about later, was it was a TREC recommendation, but it was also ended up in Senate Bill 300 as well. The commissions have agreed to actually do that, to get together and put together both commissions, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then some additional things, TREC recommendation 57, as it related to CIT training. There's some little nuances that have to be worked out with that. I think everyone is in agreement that some type of crisis training needs to take place on a more regular basis within the law enforcement community. And then there's the revamp of BLET, which is already going on from the Justice Academy. TREC recommendations and policies and best practices. As it relates to best practices, that was also broken down into like two different types. And one of those was a policy to increase transparency, but also discipline and decertification. And the hope and goal is to kind of keep officers in the law enforcement community from running from one agency to the next agency, especially if they have a troubled past or history. We want to strengthen the accreditation in North Carolina. So we're still working to kind of get a seat at that table and talk about some of the TREC recommendations as it relates to accreditation. Then we want to, TREC recommendation 52 was talking about expanding and finding some funding for the CJ Fellows program as well. As it related to best practices, we had some conversation with the task force not the task force, but the commission, who actually put together a subcommittee to talk about best practices as it related to the peaceful demonstration portion of TREC recommendation 27 and 28. It was a great discussion. I happened to be part of that. There's a lot of information that's already in place. One of the things that was discussed in that particular meeting was getting that information out, what can be released as part of the best practices, but also getting sheriffs and chiefs, bosses of departments, for lack of a better term, a playbook on how to best facilitate the peaceful demonstrations as it relates to the training that all officers receive already throughout North Carolina. Then best practice for requiring or the creation of diversity task force through an accreditation part. That's found in TREC recommendation 55, and then developing best practice or guides for recruitment and retention. So, that's a twofold issue there. You want to hire better people, and then you want to keep the people that you hire. And so we've got to trying to help departments figure out the best ways to kind of go about that. So that's kind of what the commission task force part of the executive branch was doing here. Just to give you a few more updates, both commissions agreed to form an advisory group to explore the implementation of the TREC recommendations, like I already discussed. The group is made up of members from both commissions, both the sheriff and the BLET commissions here, and rules, best practices, and for retention and recruitment, best practices for peaceful protests. The subgroups have been meeting and have started working with their respect to the best practice groups. We're going to seek out other stakeholders and basically keep that conversation going. And then the timeline, again, working in conjunction and in collaboration with the commission. They've kind of said, hey, we're willing to kind of take a look at these things and and get a timeline going here. And so the next commission meeting is going to be November, December 20 of 21. And the goal is to have temporary rulemaking authority on the similarity of the codes, which again is found in Senate Bill 300, and then to kind of get some momentum on the psych evaluations. And then the long term, by the end of 2020, is hopefully we'll get a goal for a permanent rulemaking completed. And that pretty much sums up my portion of it. Jasmine, did I do okay?
You did great, thank you.
I know I was talking fast, but that happens when I get nervous.
You got it all in. You got it all in. Thank you. The slides went away, Ellen. I don't know if you're still sharing. You could share again.
I am sharing. Hold on, let me stop and
see them. Jasmine, we can see them.
Oh, you can? Okay, well, I don't need to see them. I know what they say.
Okay.
SB 300 training successes is the slide.
Perfect, thank you. So that's where we'll start. So as everyone knows, Senate Bill 300 passed, and this slide in the bold are the training recommendations that the task force made that were included in 300. So you'll see community policing, use of force, duty to intervene and report. The good news is that the Joint InService Training Commission, committee of the commissions has already set the training topics for 2023 to include these topics. And so they'll be happening in the next in-service that had not already been planned. More about sort of the sort of cadence of training a little bit later, but I think this was all good that this is now in statute, and also is consistent with a lot of interest and training that the commission's already had. The other point of note from 300 related to training is that they are now exempt from the administrative process that slows down the ability to have make training topics each year. And so that's going to be helpful going forward for the commissions, and I think for the community in the field and all of the stakeholders to have the commissions be able to respond more quickly to needs for training. Next slide, please. So this next slide is really, we wanted to take an opportunity to understand what training already existed that we had recommended. And the good news is we found out there was a lot. There was a lot that was happening either already in BLET or is in the process of happening through the development of the new BLET, which is happening right now through the job task analysis that was done by the commissions and is being worked on in collaboration with the North Carolina Justice Academy. So you'll see that we actually made a lot of training recommendations, and so it was very thankful to colleagues who helped us really go through the training catalog of the Justice Academy, talking with colleagues of the Justice Academy and others to understand what classes already existed and which ones were in development. So for example, there's a course on communication skills for law enforcement, and we made a recommendation around interpersonal communication skills. I think also, when you get down to number 5 in the slide, and we'll send these out afterwards. I know this is a lot of information on one slide, but use of force is obviously an important topic given the work that initially brought us all together. And that advisory group is currently exploring revisions to the BLET part of it. Other topics, for example, emotional intelligence is something that's introduced in the new BLET. So lots of topics that we thought were important and were recommended are going to be a part of the new BLET. If you go to the next slide. And so this is a similar exercise for what's happening in in-service. So obviously for in-service, this doesn't mean that these trainings will take place every year, but we think it's promising that they've been either voluntary or mandatory in-service topics in the recent past or will be in the future. Topics like de-escalation and protest training have been in-service topics in the past. And so those classes exist, and as long as when there is interest and an instructor, they can be taught again. And so that's good and important progress to where we ultimately want to be. in terms of our training recommendations. Our next step on in-service training is to present to the joint in-service committee of both commissions later this month. And what we want to do there is really highlight some of those areas where we believe training is critical, but also sort of what the cadence of that training will be. For example, in 300, there's now a requirement for training on duty to intervene, but the statute, the law didn't say how often that had to take place. So we want to talk about those types of things. The commissions are struggling with a lot of stakeholders suggesting training, and all of it requires more hours and more resources. And there are real practical realities for what that means for law enforcement in terms of their ability to do their jobs and to be trained. And so really the question is sort of what is the right number of hours, and how do you make sure people can actually take those hours and still effectively do their job? So we're excited to be a part of that conversation. We're excited that some of our priority recommendations have also been recommended by the SBI, the Sheriff's Association, and others. One of the things that we really want to talk about, and Billy touched on this a little earlier, is this distinction between crisis, what we're calling little C crisis intervention training and crisis intervention teams. And that's a really important distinction. When we're talking about crisis intervention teams, we're talking about that 40-hour course. People get a specialization. They perhaps will become a specially trained unit, which, as you recall, was a part of our recommendations in terms of reimagining emergency response, that at the very least, law enforcement agencies have those specially trained units. But what our recommendation around crisis intervention training was not necessarily about those units. It was really that baseline information that all law enforcement need to have. And in fact, the crisis intervention training program, the 40-hour program, it's called the Memphis model, has said to many stakeholders, that's not something, that's the specialization is not something that we want everybody to have. We want that to be a specialized training. So then the question is, what is that baseline that everybody needs? How many hours is that? How do you get that for people? How do you make sure it happens across the state? And so that's a conversation that I think lots of people are interested in. I think a lot of people recognize the importance. And so we're excited to be a part of it. On the 40-hour side, DHHS at the state level has been very engaged in train the trainer models to make sure that people who do want that 40 hours have access to it. And so we're partnering with them on sort of a parallel track. So the sort of all law enforcement crisis intervention training, little CIT, and then the teams as sort of a separate track. We also want to talk about use of force and implicit bias when we have the opportunity to get before the in-service committee. So if there are other thoughts that you all have for us in advance of that meeting, please let us know. We'd be happy to hear your perspective, but Billy and I are going to be doing that in a couple of weeks. Next slide. And then the final slide is just highlighting a couple of the other training recommendations that sits a little bit outside of this process that we've been talking about thus far. The first is training on the proper use of SROs. This is a recommendation that's not just for law enforcement, but is also for school personnel. And the idea here is that where SROs are present, we need all of the stakeholders to understand what their role is and what it isn't. And it is not to be involved in school discipline. It is not to necessarily be involved in minor issues, but to really identify those places where they are most needed and for them not to be involved in things that school personnel should really be handling. This goes hand in hand with school justice partnerships. We think there's opportunity for SROs to have this information in their SRO training, but the difficult nut to crack is really school personnel. And we've been working with the Center for Safer Schools on ideas for developing training for school personnel. This is also a part of the school safety action plan. And so we have partners and collaborators who care about this issue, who want to help make it happen. Billy Lassiter's team at the Department of Public Safety is also doing a number of trainings at the beginning of each year for the SROs and their justice counselors to make it clear that these are the types of cases that should not be coming to us. We're going to kick them back. Do not send them. And they have seen some benefit from those types of conversations. So we're hopeful that we can get that kind of training happening on a broad scale across the state. The other recommendation is requiring training on internal law enforcement agency policies. That is our initial idea for implementation of that recommendation was through the statewide accreditation program. We know that it is also a requirement of CALEA. And so right now we are in a bit of a standstill because the statewide program is still in development, but we're hopeful that this can be sort of a pillar of that program and also something that we can talk with local agencies about as well. And then finally, our training program, our final training recommendation was about evaluating the effectiveness of training programs. So we've made these training recommendations. We believe that they're important, but some of them, there's not a lot of evidence around how well they work and how they can help sort of move the ball. And so this recommendation was really about trying to find a partnership to study the effectiveness of certain trainings. And so we are having conversations with the Justice Academy and RTI and others about how we can support a study like that going forward. So with that, I will stop unless anybody has questions for me or Billy on the executive committee report or comments or suggestions. Okay.
Well, thank you both so much. It really is impressive. You did share a lot in a short period of time, but it's really impressive what the Committee 1 has been doing. That brings us to Committee number 2, which is the Judicial Branch Action Committee. And for that report, we're turning to Sam Davis.
Hi, everyone. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, just to begin, I do want to just thank kind of everyone on the Judicial Committee who's continued to push on our recommendations, and also, we've been working with folks from other committees outside the task force. So just thank you to everyone who's continued to be committed to this work. Ellen, if you could move to the first slide. So I think I'll start just by talking about some of the kind of bigger substantive things we're working on. And then at the end here, just talk a little bit about how the committee sees its work going forward. So to begin with, I think kind of big area of focus for us at the moment is our model policy project, which I know we've spoken about in the past, and I think everyone has been involved in some way. But so we have 4 kind of model policies right now that are kind of in various stages of development that we're going to be using kind of as part of the outreach strategy that I describe later here. So the first, which all credit due to Emily Coward and to other folks who've contributed here, Judge Thornburg, Judge Clark, but the first one here is the suggested jury practices for judges. So this touches on 3 of our recommendations that were directly targeted at changing how juries are comprised and kind of affecting how they operate. So this was recommendation 91, ensure a diverse and representative jury pool. Recommendation 92, address discrimination in jury selection. Recommendation 93, implicit bias education for jurors and court actors. So this is a pretty lengthy and detailed guide that we hope we can use to help change practices kind of at a district by district level. The next 3 model policies all relate to kind of the ongoing fines and fees work, which we, as have discussed in past meetings, we're pursuing through a variety of avenues. But these 3, so an info sheet on fines and fee expunctions for judges and clerks, a model policy on how to handle non-payments of fines and fees, and then what we're calling here an ability to pay flow chart, but can also talk about it as like a bench card. So each of these is kind of directed at judges and clerks, and is kind of both setting out kind of how judges and clerks should approach kind of non-payment, fines and fees, those issues as a policy matter, but also some just both technical and tactical advice or guides about how to implement kind of these policies in the course of a workflow of what's actually happening in the courtroom. Skip ahead here for a second. So relatedly, so fines and fees legislative efforts. I think we have heard kind of consistent feedback from people across the task force that there's some appetite for continuing to push on fines and fees legislation, but also to just tap into kind of the expertise and breadth of commitment to this issue on the task force. So, for example, one kind of question we want to answer and that we think is important to legislative efforts is there's obviously when we talk about fines and fees, there's going to be a budgetary impact if we make changes to how fines and fees are assessed and collected. But we want to help identify kind of the other side of the coin here, which is that we're already spending a lot of money to collect fines and fees. And so I think bringing more data to that picture would be something really useful that we've heard that we're working on. And the other is just having the judges who are working on this every day be able to kind of participate in the process for developing our legislative recommendations. The survey, so I think, Ellen, we can go to the next slide. So a big effort, and really thank you to Ellen for driving this, but a big effort that the Judicial Committee has been working on is our kind of survey outreach effort. And as I'll describe in a little bit, like there are two kind of main functions of the survey. So one is just to try and capture a snapshot of where offices are right now and a really array of all of the recommendations that are directed at both district attorneys' offices and the judiciary. So as you can see, our prosecutor survey, we've got 10 responses so far. We're hoping to boost that. Also doing some individual outreach there. On the judicial survey, we're really encouraged. We've had really extensive participation, and from the results, people took this really seriously and provided really thoughtful responses to the question. So really encouraged there. Ellen, if you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of talk through what we're going to do with all of this. So I think you see that headline here, kind of future work, pivot to local policy strategy. And I think, to step back, like we're really encouraged by the progress that we've been making in this committee and the task force generally. But we do want to acknowledge there have been challenges, and we continue to see some barriers to implementation. And some of this has come out in conversations with task force members, with the various stakeholders that we're engaged in. And then some of this also starts to come out in the survey. And I think these kind of barriers start to inform how we're thinking about the strategy. So just to name, three that I think we've seen in the survey. So one is just kind of the long impact of COVID. So both in that people who are running our system day to day are both dealing with the ongoing effects of the pandemic and how it shapes, it just makes everything a little harder to do, but also still just digging out from this massive backlog as the criminal justice system starts to recover, so to speak. It can feel like an overwhelming crush of work. The second issue is related and kind of an eternal issue is around resources. And this is particularly an issue for smaller offices, often some rural offices who just don't have the staff capacity or the funding to really feel competent taking on new initiatives or changing kind of the processes within a courtroom. So like, for example, we have heard from judges, other courtroom personnel that a lot of the kinds of recommendations that fall within the judicial committee bucket require a lot of work from clerks of court, and absent kind of support, training, education, additional staff, that can just be difficult to take on. The third kind of big picture barrier that we see, and again, this comes out in the survey to some extent. So we're really encouraged on the whole that by the kind of breadth of support and just commitment to the overall mission of the task force and to the recommendations. But that is not universal. There are folks that disagree with kind of either our high level understanding of the problem, or who agree but then have questions or concerns about the individual recommendations, and that remains true, and obviously makes it hard sometimes for us to fully implement kind of with the urgency and at the speed that we would like. So all of that is a long-winded way of framing for everyone what it is the Judicial Committee is going to be doing. So I think when we say a pivot to local policy strategy, I think what that means is that we recognize to some extent the best way to make progress on a lot of our recommendations is to do kind of the hard work of either one-on-one or small group, or but that kind of outreach that meets people where they are and engages in a conversation that is a dialogue moving towards the recommendations that we think are important to implement. So tangibly, as we're developing these model policies, as we're reviewing the survey results, what we want to do is, one, start to identify areas where there's a lot of interest, but not a ton of progress on implementation, and use that to drive kind of how we focus our efforts. We also want to develop just a more general outreach campaign. I think obviously working with the local policy committee, where we're getting out there and trying to do our best to, for folks who are already interested and aligned with our strategies and just need help implementing, making sure that we can provide whatever technical assistance, whatever information, the connections that we can as a task force. And then for folks who aren't, or who have questions or just are unsure, we're going to be out there talking and engaging in kind of open, good faith conversations, and then really just shift hearts and minds and make sure that the people who have kind of the authority, who are dealing with these issues every day, they know where we stand, and that we can try and address those concerns. So I think I'll stop there. If there are any questions, ideas, we're always open to ideas, or if there are any Committee 2 task force members who'd like to have anything else to add that I forgot. Great, thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Sam. I do want to emphasize that I'm really proud of the Judicial Committee. Our members have worked really hard, but thank you, Sam, for also identifying some of the challenges that we are facing and some of our ideas for how to overcome those. So that brings us to Committee 3, the Legislative Action Committee. And Tally, you're going to start first.
I am. Good morning.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm excited to see each of you, and just really excited about sort of where we are at the Legislative Committee. It's a tough task because I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone, but we have a divided government with a Democratic governor and a Republican General Assembly. But I was very proud that we were all able to come together and really have Republicans and Democrats, folks who have been part of really raising criminal justice issues from the Black Lives Matter perspective, and law enforcement all come together to celebrate the signing of SB 300. I was extremely proud of all of the work that the staff did, as well as our legislators on the Legislative Committee for the work, as well as so many of you as members of this task force, and particularly our chairs, just all the work everyone did. A lot of it sort of behind the scenes. I've really learned that so much happens in the locker room, and it's important for folks to just keep doing the work, and that's what happened. But it's a step forward in a very big challenge. And so we are aware of that in the legislative committee. And we're also so proud that we have all of the other committees. And I just want to say how thoughtful I think our chairs have been about understanding that the legislature is one way in which we can make change. But as we've already heard from the executive committee and the judicial committee, and as we'll hear from communications and data, there are multiple steps to really moving forward on this. And so I'm just grateful for each of you. This is a picture of some of our task force members, many of you, at the signing of SB 300 and an article that came out about it. And there's Jasmine, who has been a real leader for us, as you all know, right there in the middle. So I'm just so proud of each of you. And Kerwin Pittman was able to speak. Attorney General Stein, you were able to speak. The governor obviously spoke and did the signing, and many others really did the work. And so just excited about that and grateful for our committee members. I do want to recognize our committee members. Senator Mohammed, Representative Morey. We had Sheriff Clemens as an active part of our committee, and always grateful just for him and his legacy. Tara Callahan and Representative Galliard. And as many of you know, really sort of one of the main ways in which this task force has made as much progress as it has and really done critical work in so many ways, and I frankly don't know how they do it, is the staff that has staffed our committee and has staffed each of the other committees. So just really grateful for your team, Attorney General Stein, just extraordinary. And of course, Natalia from the governor's office and so many others. So thank you to each of you. And with that, I want to turn it over to Senator Mohammed just to tell us a little bit more about where we are with the SB 300 and those accomplishments.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tally, for your wonderful words. I just want to begin by thanking each of you for continuing to join us on this journey, and especially the wonderful staff that's been so helpful. We all began this journey together over a year ago, almost last summer after the murder of George Floyd, figuring out how we can actually work to improve our justice system. And that's what Senate Bill 300 is at the end of the day. It's not the greatest thing, but is certainly an improvement on what we have. It's a culmination of a lot of your hard work, especially a lot of the key stakeholders involved. And like you heard Tally talk about, a tremendous bipartisan effort. Again, we would love to see this bill go a lot further, and I'm looking forward to kind of going through it with each of us. But I especially do want to count the countless folks who joined us on our listening sessions, the public comments, the number of advocates that reached out to Representative Morey, myself, and so many other legislators on advocating for so many key provisions. So this is all because of your hard work. And if it wasn't for for all of us together as a team, especially the members of the task force and the staff and the public, and I don't think that we would be here today. But one of the biggest things I'll tell you is the passage of Senate Bill 300 is at least an acknowledgement that our system needs work. And we need to continue to work to improve it. So this is an important first step. So with that, I'll just go through parts of the bill as I've been requested to do. So Senate Bill 300, it passed the Senate on August 24th. We had actually passed it months before it went to the House. The House finally picked it back up on August 18th, and the governor, like you heard Tally talk about, signed it on September 2nd. 2021. Some of the key provisions of Senate Bill 300 real quick is Part 1 creates a public database of law enforcement certifications and suspensions and revocations. Some of the other provisions is that it requires the use of the federal wrap back system so we can essentially track law enforcement behavior, allows us to require written notification of giglio material, essentially credibility issues that would make an officer open to impeachment by defense in a criminal trial. You've got some other things in here as far as establishing new standards, healthcare providers, allow healthcare providers to transport an individual for involuntary commitment, requiring law enforcement to receive training in mental health and wellness strategies, requiring psychological screening before a law enforcement officer is certified for employment, which is absolutely critical. Requires these law enforcement commissions to create best practices and recruitment guides to encourage diversity within their organizations. You've got additional expanded mandatory in-service training for law enforcement officers that would include ethics training, mental health topics, community policing, understanding how to deal with people of color, and being able to work with those individuals. Use of force issues and duty to intervene and report is also included in there. Another key provision is being able to limit the use of our local ordinance offenses like sleeping on a park bench, which is critical. Obviously, we weren't able to eliminate a lot of those and completely decriminalize those low-level local ordinance offenses, but we were able to create some sort of defense for an individual if they were to not pick up a new criminal charge related to that offense within 30 days, or were able to seek out some sort of assistance to address the underlying conditions, mental health, employment, substance abuse, what have you. Then that criminal charge would be dismissed. We also have moved towards requiring first appearances within 72 hours from 96 hours. Our task force had recommended 48 hours, but as you will see, if you go through Senate Bill 300, there are still a number of compromises that had to be made. But again, still an improvement on what we have. Another key provisions that I know folks are interested in is also, again, looking at recodification. The bill creates a bipartisan legislative working group to look at recodification and create some sort of database for state crimes and ordinance offenses. In addition, the body cam issue, as many of you know, has come up time and time again. None of the bills that we were able to pass this session addressed public release of body cam footage. But after what happened in Pasquotank County, we wanted to make sure at least family members were able to see what happened to their loved ones when they've lost a life or something, or have faced some sort of serious bodily injury. So what Senate Bill 300 does is allows family members to essentially fill out a notarized form requesting immediate disclosure of that body cam footage. From there, the law enforcement agency would have up to 3 days to petition to a Superior Court judge, and the Superior Court judge at that time would review the footage and must enter an order within 7 business days. If parts of the video are denied to be released, or all the video together to the family, then the Superior Court judge would have an additional 20 days to reconsider that order. But that's parts of Senate Bill 300. And again, like I said, we still have a lot more to do. We recommended decriminalization of low-level marijuana. Unfortunately, that's not in this bill. We had hopefully looked for things like getting our Attorney General's office or an independent prosecutor, special prosecutor to investigate and prosecute use of force incidents. That's not in there. Eliminating cash bail. So there's still a lot more work to do. Thankfully, we were able to pass, along with Senate Bill 300, other bills like Senate Bill 207 that I'm sure you'll hear from Representative Moore, another bill that deals with the shackling of pregnant women, and we've still got another bill that's pending in the North Carolina House related to driver's license fines and fees. So happy to talk about those at the appropriate time if need. But thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you, Senator Mohammed, and thank you to each of you for the work on that. We do want to talk about a few other bills. I'm going to ask Representative Moore if you could share a little bit about SB 207, and then also 608, and then we'll come back to you, Senator Mohammed, for SB 490.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. If I'm on your screen, I may look like I've been in a cat fight, but I've just been really doing the hard work fighting for TREC recommendations. And as Senator Mohammed said, we didn't get everything we wanted, but we went through these recommendations. We filed a lot of bills. Some weren't ever heard in committee, but the ones we're highlighting today, I think we've made great progress. It's not perfect, but it is a great start. So Senate Bill 207, there was a companion bill in the House, and we were really looking at juvenile justice issues. And there were 2 main components of that. that the TREC recommendation 68 asks that DAs have total discretion whether or not to prosecute and accept pleas in juvenile court for the 16, 17-year-olds. We want to half measure that the recommendation, and it was signed into law by the governor in September, that DAs will have discretion to keep E and G felonies in the juvenile court if probable cause has been found, which is a good step. And if the DA declines to prosecute any mandatory transfer case that would be a D through a G felony, the jurisdiction can remain in juvenile court. So that's a great improvement. The other big part of 207 that I really had my heart into, we have to take young children out of juvenile court jurisdiction. TREC recommended in number 66 that we raise the minimum age to 12. I filed a bill and the Senate filed a bill that was somewhat similar. It went down to the age of 10. The final outcome is that we are removing 6, 7-year-olds totally from our juvenile jurisdiction. If it is an 8 or 9-year-old, if they are charged with a more serious felony, A through G felony, there can be a petition filed in our juvenile court. But basically 1,100 children under the age of 10 will no longer be coming into juvenile court jurisdiction. We will call them vulnerable children, and they can get some consultation and services to help them and their families. So it was a good step. We didn't go far enough, but really pleased that that got passed. One other bill, and I guess, Tally, if you want me to, I want to recognize Tara Callahan, other members of our task force subcommittee, Jim Woodall, Senator Muhammad, Commissioner Ronnie Smith, and I were all on this subgroup for court recommendations. And I really thank them for their work and many of our recommendations in TREC. But 608 it's a big deal. 36 states had protection statutorily for pregnant women who are incarcerated in our prisons or our jails. This was a monumental dignity for women bill that the governor has signed. It was a lot of hard work of the governor's staff, of DHHS, of DPS, of advocates. How do we help and protect our pregnant females who are in jail or prisons? So what it's doing, and it has several provisions, but basically it is restricting use of restraints on pregnant incarcerated women during the 2nd, 3rd trimesters, during labor and delivery, and also for 6 weeks afterwards. There are no body cavity searches unless it's a certified medical personnel. The cost of care for pregnant females will be borne by DPS or the local jails. It's ensuring proper nutrition for the women and their soon-to-be born child with dietary supplements, making sure that everyone has access to hygiene products, and that once a birth occurs, that there will be no placement more than 250 miles between the mother and the child. Still a long way, but at least that was addressed. And female guards would do inspections wherever possible. And I think there's training for state prison officials. And one of the most important parts of this finally is the inspection, which allows DHHS oversight to inspect regularly our jails. And this was a big provision that was agreed to by many people working across many departments with DPS, DHHS, and advocates. And those inspections are important to make sure the act is followed through. So that was a great bill. Many people worked very hard on that. I will add just one other TREC recommendation that I don't think is going to be mentioned, but I do want to mention it because we have many other recommendations to eliminate juvenile life without parole. TREC recommendation number 70 was to establish a juvenile review board for the governor's clemency office. That has been implemented by the governor's office. I'm on that review board, and we will be reviewing almost 300 petitions of young people under the age of 18 who were sentenced to prison for more than 20 years. And so that work is beginning, is really exciting work. And that was a great recommendation by Trek that will be fully on board and implemented over the next 2 years during our meetings. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I just have to say that, as you said, that's a really big deal, the dignity for women. And so just really grateful for all who worked on that, but particularly Tara Callahan, who did a lot of behind the scenes work, and obviously you, Representative Morey. Senator Mohammed, if you could just tell us a little bit about some pending legislation, but particularly SB 490 and anything else you want us to know that's sort of still in the works.
Sure. Thank you, Tally. Again, Senate Bill 490, it's called License to Work. It was sponsored by myself, Senator Danny Britt, and Senator Ralph Heiss, both Republicans. We passed that bill back in May, 49 unanimously, 2-0. I believe one person had an excused absence. Unfortunately, that bill's been sitting in the House. It has drastically changed a lot since then. The original purpose of the bill was if you're dealing with fines and fees, and you could at least provide proof of liability car insurance, then your driver's license should be reinstated. Also work towards removing some of the additional suspensions when your driver's license has already been suspended for moving violations, and which would also help hundreds and thousands of people's would be failure to appear again. The maximum period of revocation would be 12 months as long as they provided some sort of proof of liability insurance. Unfortunately, I'm sure Representative Morey can probably speak about what's happening potentially Senate Bill 490 as well. It looks like the House has made a number of changes. I've heard everything from folks wanting to work towards garnishments to setting up some sort of liens to now we're at some sort of payment plan, a $10 payment plan if you've been convicted of some sort of traffic offense, and if you're trying to get your driver's license back into appropriate condition, then you'd have to work out some sort of payment plan is my current understanding. I spoke with Senator Britt 2 weeks ago about what's happening in the House. He tells me the bill still looks like it's pretty stuck over there. We might not be able to pass it this long session. We might have to get it towards a short session, but this is a critical issue. There's hundreds and thousands of folks across North Carolina who can't get to work, who can't have stable housing. This is actually a bill about being able to work, license to work. So I would hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle could come together in the House and pass the original bill that we did out of the state Senate unanimously, hopefully by the short session. But that's what's going on. We're looking forward to working on some additional provisions that our wonderful task force recommended in our task force report, hopefully gearing up for that in a short session. Happy to speak to anyone either on staff or the task force members if they want to have any input or any other suggestions on future pieces of legislation. Hopefully we can get that passed in a bipartisan manner like we did a number of these bills. But again, can't thank each of you enough for all your help and all your efforts, and especially to my friends like Jasmine McGee and Bradford and Natalia and so many others who've dedicated so much time and efforts to help us along the way. Thank you to you all.
Thank you, Senator Mohammed. And I just got a scary chat from the North Carolina Department of Justice telling me I had 2 minutes. So I will I'm just joking. I'm sure it's one of our great staff who just sent me a chat, but it was labeled the North Carolina Department of Justice. Our last thing that we wanted to have, and really I think the better format is what Justice Earls is going to lead us through in just a few minutes, but is we'd love some feedback from all of you, and there's a number of ways you can do that. One is I believe we are going to have a sort of a gathering to really brainstorm next year. We're also going to have a facilitated discussion in a few minutes about sort of where we should go and what we're proud of. And then third, you can reach out to me or any of our committee members or our staff. But here's what we need. We need to know what we should be focused on of the recommendations for the coming year for the short session. 2, we need to use the time that we have, which we just didn't have because the recommendations came out right before the long session, to be building relationships and making connections. Many of us and you already have great relationships, whether it's with your own representative or senator, or folks that you know, or your association, whether it's the prosecutors, the chiefs of police, the sheriffs. We really want to be in good, constructive conversations going forward, as we did this last year, but we want to use the time in between that we have more of this time. So would love your suggestions for ways to do that and your connections. And then third, we would just look for any additional suggestions you have for just how we should be approaching the short session. So thank you to each of you, and we really look forward to your thoughts as we move forward with this meeting. And with that, I will turn it back over to our chairs.
Well, I want to make sure we leave time. If anyone has specific questions for that committee, now's a good time to ask any questions. Okay,
I did have one question.
Please.
I know that you all spoke a lot about the vehicle regulatory side of the house and as it relates to people's driver's license. And I was just wondering if there was any thought given to the requirement for the emissions inspection. I know from having some time out in the field that you pull folks over and they're unable to get their registration taken care of because they got a check engine light on. Basically what it boils down to. And then that snowballs into your registration being revoked and then your license plate getting taken and now you can't drive the car off the side of the road and that kind of thing.
I'll just say that that has not been a conversation I've been part of, but it's certainly something we can talk about. I'm sure we'll have some folks who care deeply about emissions and other things that'll have some thoughts about that. But I hear what you're saying, and I think that that's something that we should definitely have some conversations about. So appreciate that being raised.
I think the other place that comes up is in our, and we'll talk about this in local policy presentation, our traffic stop model policy doesn't speak specifically to emissions, but it certainly talks about regulatory stops and how to engage in that process from our perspective.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all the members of that committee for that amazing report. I know that what I'm struck by is both the incredible breadth of the reforms that you got passed. It just strikes me the number of lives who you are impacting by this work. And I know you faced incredible hurdles. Like this wasn't all consensus and smooth sailing. You had a lot of pushback. And so to some degree, I think you have important lessons learned and skills and techniques and how you accomplish that we could really benefit from building on. So thank you for that report and for the great work. That brings us to the Local Policy Action Committee, and I'm always excited about this committee. When we hear from Dr. Correa, she's working at the local level. So part of what we're exploring is we've got our legislative agenda, it's moving and incredible work on that. But we also know there's a lot that can happen that's incredibly impactful through the local level. So for that report, we're turning to Mike Hawkins.
All right, thank you, Justice Earls. Yeah, and you just touched on something that I was going to say. Listening to the first three reports, local is very different in that we are trying to connect with 100 different counties and hundreds of organizations within 100 different counties. And a big part of what we're trying to do is developing foundations and frameworks so that we can get the message out in all of these different areas. And if we can do that effectively, then we believe that it'll help all the committees and help the task force it'll be easier to pass legislation if these local people understand the issues and how they impact on the local level. I'm going to hand it over to Jasmine and to the other staff here in just a second, but I would like to recognize the members of our committee because they've been doing a tremendous amount of work and certainly deserve the recognition. We have 5 task force members on this committee. Deborah Dix Maxwell is a member. We have subcommittees. She's a member of our Victims and Community Subcommittee. She's the president of the NAACP in New Hanover County. They're in Wilmington. The other member of that subcommittee is Angelica Wynn. She's in Asheville. She's just transitioned into a new position. She's now Region 1 Director, Healthier Together component of the NC Counts Coalition. Then we also have a law enforcement subcommittee. Chief Smythe is on that. Along with myself, Jeff Smythe, and I call him Chief. He's no longer Chief. He just retired from the Burlington Police Department, but he's transitioned over to the Department of Justice, where he's now the Director of the Criminal Justice Standards Division. And then we've got a subcommittee of local subcommittee, and we have 2 elected officials on that subcommittee. Ronnie Smith, who is the chairman of the board of the Martin County Commission. Also just rotated off as president of the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and Ronnie's done an enormous amount of work with this connectivity that we talked about a second ago. Just an enormous amount of work with that. And also Mayor Colvin, Mitch Colvin, who's the mayor of Fayetteville, is on that subcommittee. So people from all over the state, and they're all doing a ton of work. I would also mention the 4 staff people that are working with the local committee. Jasmine, of course, Jasmine McGee, but also Jeff Welty and Holly Jones and Greg Sabin, and they're all taking leadership in these different initiatives. And I can't say enough. We can't say enough for all that they're doing. And with that, like a good chairman, I'm going to turn it over to other people and let them do the work. And begin with Jasmine. Jasmine?
Great, thank you, Mike. We wanted to start by talking about, if you go to the next slide, please. I think I can see them now. Yes. Some of the successes of the local policy committee since our last meeting. As you've heard already today, we've been working on a model policy and information sheet project. And we are getting close to completion on both a traffic stops model policy and a consent search policy. Traffic stop policy is focused on our recommendation that law enforcement focus on public safety stops rather than regulatory stops. We're excited about the process that we've developed for all of these model policies, but particularly these that impact law enforcement, because we've pulled together a lot. I'm skipping around to my last bullet, a law enforcement advisory panel to talk with these policies about and to hopefully help be champions for these ideas as we listen to their input, but also listen to the input of other external stakeholders as well. So those are 2 policies that are moving forward and hopefully will be ready for prime time and for you to see them shortly. You saw earlier that the community policing was identified in 300 as an area for training. It's also an area that we've been working on via outreach and via the local policy, the law enforcement advisory group as well. There are continuing conversations about the best way to be impactful in the space, because part of what we talked about a lot in the first phase is how community policing means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so we're really trying to narrow down exactly what we're trying to accomplish in that recommendation. And so it's been a lot of brainstorming and conversation. And then we had a series of ARP sessions back in July. ARP is the American Rescue Plan. And this money brings millions of dollars into the state government, but also into local government, counties, cities, and school systems. It's very much exclusively tied to pandemic recovery. And we highlighted some of our recommendations that could be, that pilot programs could be started with those dollars, as all local jurisdictions would have some amount of money. And so those sessions were on reimagining emergency response, and we had people who were doing local jurisdictions that were doing co-responder models, and also local jurisdictions that were doing sort of cahoots-based models in terms of how they respond to law enforcement response. We had a session on diversion programs, and then we had a session on violence prevention or violence interruption programs. One success that I don't know that we can take full credit for, but we'll take some credit for, is that New Hanover County, after the tragedy, the recent school shooting there, has agreed to put millions of dollars into violence intervention programs in New Hanover County, which is really an exciting development modeled on what Durham is doing in the Bolsing United Violence Interrupter Program. So that is another success. And so I already mentioned the Law Enforcement Advisory Panel. Ellen, if you go to the next slide, wanted to let everyone know and highlight the members of that advisory panel, and then those TREC members who've been participating as well. So these are, we put out a call for members, and we asked for law enforcement leaders. They need not agree with every recommendation of the task force, but we asked that they be committed to the cause of racial equity and criminal justice. And so these law enforcement leaders stepped up. They've been active participants in our conversations and have been honest with us, but also encouraging and positive. And I think it's really been, every conversation has been really impactful and helpful. So more to come with that group. We have a plan of various topics to speak with them about. If other committees have topics that they would like to run by that group, please let us know. It meets on a monthly basis. It's an open meeting. And so folks are welcome to join if they would like. Just talk to Greg Saban if you want the details for that. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we have upcoming, you see here on these bullets, are just the model policy and information sheets that we are working on. As I mentioned, traffic stops and consent searches are drafted and moving through our very complex editing process with multiple reviews, and we are excited that our comms committee is going to be helping us with doing sort of near final read-throughs, and we'll put them into our graphics format that we had the report in, so they'll look great. So that's exciting as well. We're also working on diversion, reimagining emergency response, violence prevention, restorative justice, and use of force. We're also going to be talking with a law enforcement advisory group about protest response, deprioritizing marijuana, as others were talking about, not just legislative strategies, right? Also local strategies. How can we encourage deprioritizing of marijuana and other low-level charges at the law enforcement level? We want to have that conversation. And then we also want to talk about how you change culture with policy changes, because as our former member, Chief Davis, always said, culture eats policy for lunch. And so we're looking forward to having that conversation in the local policy committee. And again, welcome any participants in that conversation, even if you're not on the local policy committee. Next slide. Still with me. Okay, so that's my slide. This is the victim community bucket. We have been charged with advancing 6 of the recommendations that are with the local policy committee. We have spent most of the last quarter having meetings with restorative justice and violence prevention programs to assist with the development of our information sheets about these programs. But we're really excited about what we're moving into now, and that is a series of meetings with victim advocacy organizations, not only because we have a recommendation to establish a victim advisory group in the implementation of the task force recommendations. So we want to sort of bring those groups in on the process of developing that advisory group. But we also just believe that it's really key to have victim and survivor voices and advocates for those voices as a part of these conversations and as a part of the stakeholder groups to help us move our recommendations forward. And as we said in our report, there is no separation between sort of public safety and justice for survivors and fairness in our system. And so we're really excited about those meetings we're going to be having over the next couple of months. And hopefully we will have a deliverable of an advisory group, but also some new partnerships to come out of those meetings as well. Next slide. think I would now turn it over to Greg and Holly to talk about the local government bucket for the committee.
Thank you. Jasmine did a beautiful job, and this is Holly, in describing our successful summer ARP sessions. The only thing I would add to that is just a few numbers, which is we had over 500 participants collectively with attendees and presenters in those sessions. And we're also trying to maintain relationships, and we've done some follow-up communications with those folks as related to Q&As, documentation. And so we think we'll try to maintain those relationships for those attendees. As it relates to outreach, we've been busy. We've been primarily focusing our outreach on local elected officials to date, and specifically we've been reaching out to the Council of Governments, and we've had super success with this. So far, we've presented to 6 different COGs, and 4 are on the schedule. And for those of you that might not know that the shorthand, it's basically a regional group of elected officials from towns and cities and counties that come together. So we're really getting a lot of bang for our buck when we're able to present to those groups. We're even going to be able to present to the statewide group. So that's going really well. And a huge shout out to my buddy, Chairman Mike Hawkins, who's been elected official that's helped with all these sessions. He's really done the lion's share of those. From this experience of what I just described is with the COGS, our DOJ Public Protection section came up with a proactive outreach plan. And basically we are organizing around kind of subject matter and stakeholder topics. And for example, we've started with the public health arena, and last week or a couple of weeks ago, was able to present to the North Carolina Association of Local Health Directors and talk about that connection with public health and these recommendations. We've also got a presentation scheduled around reentry, and Kerwin Pittman will be the TREC task force member presenting on that one. So it's a nice partnership between staff and a TREC members that are getting in front of our communities. So the last thing I would say would be that we're also excited about all the success that we've had with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, in large part to the immediate past president, Ronnie Smith, who's helped that relationship a great deal. We were able to present to their convention around 3 different recommendations that are happening in 3 different North Carolina communities. And also this relationship continues as we are a standing agenda item on the quarterly board meeting. So that's outreach, and we're just going to continue to move forward. And I'll pass it to whoever is next.
I'm guessing that's probably me, Holly, to say, are there thanking staff and our board members, our committee members, and just if there are any questions, we'll try to answer any questions that the task force might have.
Well, I actually have a question. And there may not be a way to answer this, but I'm just curious whether there's a way, whether you know of, or whether there's a way to find out if any of the people who came to the ARP sessions ended up applying for and obtaining grants that related to racial equity in the criminal justice system in some way.
I'm not aware. I'll defer to Jasmine or Holly on that.
So the primary audience, although it wasn't the exclusive audience, was the actual local government officials themselves who have the authority to spend the money. And right. So I don't think we would have a way of knowing really whether nonprofits had applied for projects that the governments had done, or if the governments had started the programs themselves, other than sort of time and wait and see. So I don't think we have a natural way of knowing that, but I think with the New Hanover example, we are seeing some activity in that space. And so I think we'll just have to continue to monitor it.
And I'll just add that I know there's a little bit of movement also in Buncombe County. Those final decisions have not been made by that particular local group, but they're seriously considering the putting some dollars in the alternative emergency response and also violence prevention. But those decisions are not made yet.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And I don't know that it's worth a lot of effort, but it just seems to me, to the extent we could identify local governments that were encouraged to spend the funds in a certain way, or just a way to demonstrate the value of having those sessions. Any other questions for that committee? All right, well, that we have two cross-cutting committees, and so we're going to hear first from the Communications Committee, and that's Laura Brewer to start.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Laura Brewer here with your communications update. There is the slide. Our committee held what I'm told is the first and only in-person TREC committee meeting. We had a hybrid meeting to brainstorm about communications in a number of different ways. A couple of so the chairs of each of the committees were together in July. We talked about strategies. One thing that we came to as a result of that meeting was the need to have a central public voice for the for TREC. And so we've been working with the committees to sort of fine tune various public work products and make sure they're all in a single voice. We also talked about the Model Policy and Information Sheets project. We have worked with a designer to create templates for the model policy and information sheet publications, and we're working to slot those products into the design and reviewing the draft language for that single voice I mentioned. We're also working to create one-pager overviews of relevant recommendations for stakeholder groups, and we're creating a one-pager for local government leaders, prosecutors, judges, and juvenile justice stakeholders. And then as it relates to the interim report, we'll take the lead on the drafting and the fine tuning for that single voice. And we'll focus on highlighting all of the success that everyone has been talking about today and all the work that's still left to be done. So it's kind of an overview of our work, short and sweet. But if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Well, I thank you for that report, and encourage the other committees to remember that if there's communications needs or that we have this committee available to serve your work in any of your efforts. The other cross-cutting committee is the Data Study and Evaluation Committee. And Ellen, I think we start with you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am going to sort of run through some of these updates on our assigned recommendations, because we are very lucky to have Dr. Will Crozier here with us, taking a break from his vacation actually to present to us on some results of the survey we sent to the judicial districts. He gave a similar presentation to the data committee, I think 2 weeks ago. It was a great presentation, and I feel the full task force would really benefit from hearing his analysis on that particular survey, and hope that we can glean sort of similar insight from both the law enforcement survey and the prosecutor survey. So first up of our assigned recommendations, we have some successes. We had 2 different recommendations that were assigned to the data committee, found their way into SB 300. One is around the collection of use of force data. Senator Mohammed already did a great job of talking about this, this piece of legislation, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but I was also encouraged to see one of our study recommendations around the physical health of officers and the effect on their job performance make their way into this recently passed piece of legislation. So those are 2 of those. I would also like to thank my colleague at DOJ, Mercedes Restuccia Clem, and several staff members of the commissions who helped make some headway on this recommendation number 53 on the collection of law enforcement recruitment and diversity efforts. You can see 3 different forms that are associated with the commission's work and BLET, excuse me. I must be hungry. And They got to include this demographic information in all 3 of these forms, which is really great. It's a richer look at ethnicity and race data, so we'll be able to collect that and report on it in the future. I also wanted to highlight April Dawson's work on the first learning series. I'm excited we're already on number 4. This is the first one to kick it off. Talk about race, data, and policing that took place back in June. It was a great start to the conversation. It was a success to have that session, but we need to continue to do more work on that recommendation. But I really thank her for getting us started as a group thinking about this important issue. Next up is sort of some things that we have ongoing. Very excited about all 3 of these. Recommendation number 23, I think some people on this call will remember that the governor's office had a really excellent fellow do a sort of gap analysis of where our data in discipline in schools and school-based referrals stands right now in the state. She's not on with us, but I want to thank Natalia, who has continued to collaborate with DPI to see how we can collect that data and how we can make it public. So she is continuing to work on that. Also in progress is 3 different efforts related to recommendation number 94. Thank you to our partners at DMV and to 2 data committee members, Emily Coward and Frank Baumgardner, who are starting to work on a study around jury source lists. They are in the early stages of that, but it's very exciting, and I thank them for their efforts to get that off the ground. Sam already talked about this model policy on jury practices, just got a draft of that. It looks excellent, very excited to have that start the review process and for y'all to be able to see that. And then also we're going to have the pleasure of having our 5th learning series be on jury practices. Emily Coward is right now contacting and getting a hold of some national experts on jury practices and how they contribute to racial equity in the criminal justice system. So we'll get you some more information on that. That should be happening in November or December of this year. Also just wanted to flag that the Sentencing Commission continues to pursue their study on disparities in sentencing laws and sentencing outcomes. That effort is still happening. So thank you to Michelle Hall and others at the Sentencing Commission for their hard work on that study as it continues forward. We have 2 different studies that we need to find a path forward. You can see them here, Rec 30 and Rec 59. We obviously don't have this capacity in-house to conduct these sort of studies, so we are looking for partnerships, but that's something that we need to focus on pursuing in year 2 of TREC. So just wanted to highlight that those are still on our radar and we're going to find ways forward on those. Lastly, and very quickly, I can send this around. One of the things the data committee has been doing is trying to lift up efforts that are already ongoing in the state that relate to our overarching recommendation, which is for data, which is about, just making sure that we have rich data in various different points along the criminal justice system, starting with stop and arrest data and going all the way through probation and post-release data. We've had some excellent presentations from Jessie Smith at the School of Government on her criminal justice data dashboard. We saw some demonstrations of that dashboard around citation versus arrest data, summons versus warrant data. You can see also that she will, in the future, work on charging data to be incorporated in there, which was one of our pieces of our recommendation for data in that area to be richer and to include racial data, which her dashboard does. We continue to rely on Frank Baumgardner's traffic stop analysis work and very excited about the Wilson Center's work with the Durham DA's office around the study of plea bargains. I think you can see here jail data and probation and post-release data are things that we need to focus on in year 2. We have yet to sort of make headway on those, and we know that they're very important, so we will be finding ways to engage in that work. And also just wanted to flag a great series of meetings we had with the GCC, hearing about their plans for their justice data portal. You can see the data that they have included there, the data they want to include in the future. I think this is going to be a really excellent tool for making sure members of the public have access to criminal justice data and can get answers about their own community. So just wanted to highlight all this work that's already happening. And we will continue to highlight these efforts in the next year. All right, well, for time purposes, I am going to turn it over to Will now, who is going to walk us through some of his findings of the Judicial District Survey. As we mentioned, the prosecutor survey, we are still looking for participation. Just wanted to highlight that we are working on the law enforcement survey too and upping survey participation there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Will share his.
Great. So I'll start off by saying I put a link in the chat. If you have any questions or anything about the presentation, you can follow that link. But yeah, so I will say this is a preliminary analysis of the survey, and I put that out there because I think there's a lot more to be done. There's a lot more that we can go into these results in terms of looking with, I think, a more fine-grained eye for maybe what sort of policies or data we're interested in looking at, as well as the fact that I don't analyze everything here. And I have a list of the stuff that I look at the end if you're interested in that. So in this presentation, really quickly, I'm going to talk about just kind of who responded and what the survey looks like from kind of a bird's eye view. I've narrowed down a couple kind of key topics that I think are interesting. So I will present some of the preliminary results on that, and then share with you my main 3 takeaways, or kind of the main, I guess, like analytical approach that I took, which was to describe current practices, specify kind of what's written and what's collected in terms of policies and data, and identify barriers and ways forward to making changes that we might want to see, and that the respondents to the survey might want to see as well. So there's a little bit more. So like I said, I list the other topics at the end. I have set up a portal. This is a link that I put in chat. I'll put it up again if you need to see it. But if you click this portal, you'll be able to find these presentation notes as a PDF. You'll be able to find a full copy of the survey with all the questions, so not the data, but the questions that people are responding to, as well as a portal so that if you have any questions or comments about the data or the presentation or want me to look closer at something, you can put that question into the Google form and give me your email, and I'll look through it and send you an answer to your question. Like I said, there's, I think, a lot of really interesting stuff to look at here. So this is maybe the most organized way to do it. Like Ellen said, I am on vacation, so I will try to get back with you in the next week or two if you have any of those questions. I'm going to do something a little bit, a little bit unusual and talk about my conclusions first, so that you guys can see kind of what my framing is as I go through the data and the things that I pull out. But essentially, kind of 3 main takeaways here is I think that there are clear paths to implementations for a lot of the policies or changes that the Governor's Task Force might recommend. I think most jurisdictions are interested in at least having conversations about a lot of these initiatives and policies to either learn more or learn how to implement them. That a lot of the barriers are not only financial. So there are some concerns over financial limitations in order to implement some changes. But I think that a lot of the other barriers are related to bringing in people that have the right expertise and the right knowledge and the right skills in order to kind of implement and improve practices. And kind of to this end, I think that many of the barriers can be solved with partnerships, whether that's experts in the field coming into helping or experts in implementing the changes. Formalization of these practices tends to be pretty sparse. And what I mean by this is things like trainings on maybe specific, on specific policies or practices. So I go into a little bit on racial equity training. They're rarely mandated across all of the jurisdictions that replied, that the policies and programs are rarely written down. So they might have a policy, they might have a program, but there's no kind of formal writing down of that that would be easy for, say, a task force to collect and analyze easily. And third, that understanding practices, kind of what's going on with the state of play is in all these different jurisdictions, likely requires individual conversations with people kind of in those jurisdictions, right? So we can't just collect policies and kind of review them from home or from an office. We really need to probably get on the phone or get on Zoom or get into a room, ask people kind of what they're doing. And a big part of this is that data is not collected very often. So even if practices or policies are in place, there's not a lot of data collection. And as a result, it's kind of hard to evaluate these things without really talking to people that are on the ground and working in the jurisdictions. All right, so the survey itself was 86 questions on a variety of topics. I put some of the topics at the end, and then I kind of highlight the key topics as I go through. We had one judge or senior resident per district and superior court. I put that they're identifiable in the sense that they actually do give us our names. So we are able to call them up and follow up with them if we would like. We had 46 unique respondents. So 46 different people went in and responded. Some people responded for a couple different, sometimes for different jurisdictions. But of these, we had 24 district court judges or senior residents, and then 22 superior court. I'm gonna caveat here that the numbers will not always add up. Like the denominators for response rates aren't always 46. This is because not everyone answered every single question because of how questions were presented. Sometimes if you said no, it prompted a different question than if you said yes, for example. And some people responded for multiple jurisdictions. So where I was able, I split those things out. Okay, so the survey itself. Example questions, just so you guys can kind of see what kind of data we're working with. We would ask, when was your jurisdiction's bond policy put into place? When was the policy last updated? Do you have any plans to update this in the future? And then if they said yes, they have plans to update, they would then describe. You can see here that a lot of the data or a lot of the responses here are for your response. People could put in whatever they wanted. So some of the effort here was just kind of converting things like between 2005 and 2010 or many, many years or a long time ago into something that we can kind of measure and relate a little more quantitatively. Another example of a question, does your jurisdiction offer pretrial services? Yes or no? If they said yes, we'd ask where they're housed. If yes, please describe these services. Does your jurisdiction collect data? Yes or no? And then if yes, they were asked to describe what sort of data they collected. And then we would ask, are they interested in having a conversation about potential barriers and ways to implement change in this policy, specifically related to pretrial services and data collection? Okay. So the first kind of topic that I pulled out that I thought would be interesting to talk about was kind of bail and first appearance. So you can see here, I looked at when jurisdictions adopted their bail policy. Most of them, about half of them, are fairly recent. So basically between 2010 and 2020, but some of them were implemented quite a long time ago. 13 listed either many years or unknown. 7 of them were from pre-2000. Fortunately, a lot of them have been updated recently. So in the last 5 years, 24, so about half have been updated. 11 were updated more than 5 years ago, and 11 of them were updated in either an unclear or unknown way. So they didn't know when it was updated, or they have some sort of special sort of process for updating it, and it's not clear if it's actually updated every year or just reviewed. So it's a little bit hard to know exactly when that was changed. 19 jurisdictions have plans to update their bond policy. And kind of the good news here is that 13 of the jurisdictions with policies older than 10 years are of this 19. So 13 of them, majority of them, want to update or have plans to update particularly old bond policies. Others seem to have the kind of this or either considering it or having some sort of rolling process, like updating it every year or reviewing it every year. And I think it's worth pointing out that 37, so the vast majority, you say that they use a bond table when they're setting bond. 32 jurisdictions offer first appearance within 48 hours for misdemeanors. I know this is kind of a specific area the task force is really interested in. So the majority of them do offer first appearance fairly quickly. Of the ones that don't, 8 provided reasons for barriers as to why they can't permit in 48 hours. So the most popular was logistics, tends to be things like identifying cases to actually bring them into court. But other issues are things like scheduling, getting the cases themselves on the schedule or having the calendar time to do it. Needing physical space was another one. They just don't have the courtrooms to do it. Looking at felonies, we see 38, so more offer first appearance within 48 hours. Only 3 of those that don't provided reasons for barriers, and it's the same sort of stuff. So logistics, such as identifying cases, scheduling. One jurisdiction listed that they have a policy within 72 hours. I don't know exactly why that deviates from the 48, but it does appear that there is a little bit of fluctuation and difference between the different jurisdictions. So looking at pretrial and diversion, we've got 47 jurisdictions that offer pretrial services. 12 of these collect data. 11 of them say they want to have a conversation. I asterisk this because I don't think all of the jurisdictions actually answer this question because of how the survey was set up. But 11 of the 12 people that did answer said they want to have a conversation. So to me, this is a pretty clear signal that jurisdictions are interested in collecting data and offering pretrial services. 18 use the court reminder system. Only 1 automatically enrolls. In terms of getting to the court, 1 jurisdiction offers childcare at the court and 2 offer transportation to the court. So as we look at areas maybe where we want to improve pretrial or pretrial appearance or court appearance, these might be interventions that we could recommend for courts to use. 32 of the jurisdictions said that they have a diversion court or diversion programs. So over half, which is a good sign, but also not all of them. So especially if we're interested in expanding diversion court or diversion programs, there are places where we can do that. Of the 7 that provided barriers, most of these tend to be financial, or a lot of them are they just need more information on how to do it. And then in the interest of time, I'll go through these again kind of quickly. I'll try to pick it up a little bit. So looking at racial equity, 22 jurisdictions offer racial equity training, only 4 require it. But 29, a lot of them are interested in establishing or expanding the racial equity training program. A lot of the jurisdictions provided barriers to implementation, such as the biggest one was just being unsure what the barriers are. It's something that they want to do, but they're not quite sure either how to do it or what's kind of preventing them. But also things like time and workload constraints for people running it, as well as people taking it, the expertise to implement, like who's responsible for paying for it or requiring people to take it. A few just need to implement it. They have the willpower, they have the resources, they just need to put it into practice. Kind of related to this 28. So again, a majority are interested in having conversations about jurors, as well as jury training and racial equity, and more broadly, jury selection. So another topic that I think the task force was particularly interested in was the school justice partnership. 34 know about the school justice partnership. 12 either didn't or didn't respond. So the majority do, and the majority of the ones that do know, 28, have taken steps to implement the partnership. This implementation is in various stages though, so it's not fully implemented across all 28. And then, so 5 have said they completed it, but others list COVID as a delay factor. So there might just be some kind of ongoing real world issues that are preventing it. But 9 want to have a conversation. And if you add these kind of numbers up, you see that most places either know about it and are either implementing it or want to have a conversation. But there are some places that either don't know about it or maybe aren't interested. And then really quickly, just kind of case outcomes, a kind of catch-all category. So 29 jurisdictions assess the defendant's ability to pay. More than half, but not all. Only 6 have a written policy. 31 provide no training on how to assess ability to pay. 36 have driver's license restoration and expunction opportunities. Only 11 have written policies. So again, just kind of, I'll go through this and then Ellen, I'll turn it back over to you. So I do think there's clear paths to implementation. There's a lot of people that want to have conversations. There are barriers I think that the task force can recommend and deal with, and partnerships can be really helpful in that. The formalization of practices is sparse, so there is a lot of policies, but like things like trainings are really mandated. Policies are rarely written down in a way that's easy to analyze. And as a result, I think that if we want to understand what's going on or make specific improvements, fortunately, people want to have conversations about it, but you kind of need to have these conversations jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for the extra couple minutes there, but like I said, the link's in the chat if you all want to review the presentation or make any questions about the data, and I'll get to that as soon as I can. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Will. I really appreciate you being with us this morning and presenting that. I think we all feel like the results you found are really encouraging and really important. There was a question that came up sort of monitoring the chat that I think, Will, if you want to ask, it covers most of the questions that have come up. I'm sorry, Tally.
Hi, Will and Ellen. First of all, I just want to say I have referred to the law enforcement survey multiple times. I felt like that was just a really critical survey. So I'm looking forward to looking at this data a little more carefully. That said, 10 prosecutors is a small cadre of the amount we have across the state. And I feel like we as task force members need to really support you. So I'm just wondering sort of what you need from us in terms of reaching out to our DAs that we have some sort of connection with, and how we might be able to support you in getting more survey responses.
So we've been sending the surveys from the criminal justice at nzdoj.gov account. So they've received the survey that way. But happy to send a list around to task force members of districts that have responded and those that have not. So you can take a look and see if the district attorney in your area has responded, and you can reach out to them to encourage response. So I'm happy to get that list to all task force members, breaking down who has and who has not responded.
Thanks. And I'd encourage everyone to just reach out to their local DA. I'm sure a lot of you have specific relationships with your local DA.
And just to get a sense, and I think Dia Whittle might still be on the call, but he was kind enough to call all of his colleagues and flag this survey. And I think we expected a little higher results than we've gotten based on those conversations. And so there does seem to be some opportunity for growth, at least to 20 or so responses. It may be that some are not interested in responding, no matter who and how many times we reach out to them. But I think there is a little bit more opportunity for growth in our response rate.
Yeah, and I think I imagine, just like us, they're very blessed with emails. So helping to flag that might help.
Yes, and if it has not been said, thank you to Judge Clark and Judge Thornburg, who did a similar effort with the judges, and I think really helped with participation. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all. I want to make sure we have a little bit of a break. And so I'm going to ask that we take a 5-minute break and come back at 11:50. And then we'll have some time to discuss. We'll hear from the public and we'll hear from our speaker. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, I see we're slowly coming back. This is the time when it's really helpful to have your camera on if you're with us. Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you for sticking with us. At this point, I want to give us an opportunity to talk with each other. And I see Anna. Hello. It's so exciting to have you join us. So at this point, we are wanting to have just a few minutes to talk with each other. And I know that some people had to leave, but to get your feedback on what, from your perspective. I mean, one of the strengths of our task force, unlike some of the other efforts around racial equity and criminal justice, has been the fact that we are a broad-based, diverse task force of stakeholders and individuals from a variety of perspectives. But to hear from you, we've gone through an incredible report out of the work of all the committees. But from your perspective, and to some degree, as I said, this is not the only opportunity to engage in this kind of bigger picture thinking and to chart our course for the rest of this year and next year. But what I'd really love to get people's feedback on what you think, what you're most proud of. If you're talking to your friends and you say, I'm on this task force and here's what we've done, what would you emphasize? What would you think is the most important, most impactful, the thing you're most proud of? And then looking forward, what is it that you would like to see us do? What should we be focusing on? What's most important for us to do next? And so I really want to throw it open, and I hope someone is ready to give us your thoughts on that.
Justice Earls, I started to type something in the chat, not knowing sort of what the agenda, how the agenda was going to work out. It's just been amazing to hear these committee reports. I think in answer to the first part of your question, the most important, the most satisfying piece of my participation on the task force, especially during step one, was meeting people I would not have had the occasion to meet and interact with before. Leaders from other parts of the states and other walks of life. Sheriff Clemens, who we've had an opportunity to talk about his legacy and his work. Yeah, I'm not sure I would have met him. Yeah, I drove past his county exceeding the speed limit, but he never stopped me. And I'm not sure I would have had that occasion, but in the meetings, we had exchanges, and then offline we had exchanges a handful of times. We didn't ever always agree, but we were candid and the exchanges were good. My sense is we're in a difficult and strange time for our democracy. The constituency that I've been most compelled to give voice to is that of the Black Lawyers Association in North Carolina and the communities of color and the organizations that advocate for those communities. And it has been a hard 9 or 10 months since the release of the report. With the insurrection, with the demagoguing of critical race theory, there's been a reversal, it seems, of that moment of reckoning that we thought we had in the summer of last year. And when I look and hear Senators Maury and Muhammad talk about how hard they fought with allies like Tara Callahan in the legislature, I take my hat off. And that was true with all of the reports. But I come back and I ask ourselves, when this task force was launched with the comments of the governor and the attorney general, Southern political leaders talking about Black Lives Matter, that shook big pieces of our community to hear those voices that strong. And my concern is we need to get back to some of those big picture thoughts. And I understand and recognize that the legislature is in many ways dysfunctional. And I think what our legislators on the task force have done has been amazing. But it doesn't match up to the transformational call that this task force was given. And my question, my challenge to the task force and to the leadership is, are there things that we can do? And by we, I mean those parts of government separate from the legislative power that can move forward some of these big pieces in our agenda. And I don't want this to be the place where, as a trial lawyer and a criminal defense lawyer, I go into a conflict situation with the cases I represent. So I won't talk about my cases. But when I look at the listserv and I talk with senior Black lawyers from across the state, the question is, have we exhausted what the executive, whether it's the governor or the attorney general, can do in those range of cases where we know racial equity has not been served, where exactly the opposite has been served? We as a committee looked at, for example, pre-2000 and post-2000 decisions in the capital range, and we know that there's a big difference. I looked at a senior Black Lawyers Association member brought to my attention a case in rural North Carolina from 1992 where they're challenging whether DNA testing should be available for a post-conviction claim. In 1993 in Eastern North Carolina, you didn't have competent counsel. The DA didn't have the authority to pursue non-capital prosecution of first-degree murder. It was a different world. And I think to the extent that we've got the ability to look at those cases and act differently, I'm encouraging that. And sort of on a broader level, are there ways that the executive power, whether it's the Department of Public Safety, whether it's the Attorney General, can engage with serious community leaders, academics, experts in the field, and have real policy discussions at a high level that would give the community some confidence that we are looking big picture, and that the government is not going to stand up and argue for policies that are dated, that come out of the height of mass incarceration. We shouldn't be in the position of defending those positions. And those are things that folks in the executive branch can do differently. So there are reasonable people at the Department of Public Safety. We heard from Commissioner Ishii. They're good people in the Attorney General's office. I've been blessed to work with so many of that staff. How do we get that sort of interaction at a high enough level that we can signal to important constituencies in the state that we are looking to move towards transformation? And eventually, things will change with the General Assembly. We'll be able to move a legislative agenda on big ticket issues. But before that, is there more that we can do? And we need to encourage our communities, the communities that are most affected by this legacy of racial discrimination. I'm sorry to have taken up so much time, but I felt a need to respond to all of the hard work that the committees are doing and making the incremental progress that good government requires. But I think there is still a need to wave that flag for progress in ways that are transformational and will give encouragement to our communities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for those reflections. Does anyone, and our purpose here really is just to get everything out on the table. So are there other thoughts, other people want to speak?
I'll jump in. The question initially, it was like, you know, we've done so much. How can you pick one to just be proud of? So for me, it boils down to taking a group of people from all different walks of lives, putting them on a task force during a period in time where people were more inclined to be quiet. We had those uncomfortable conversations that got the locomotive from sitting at the station house to moving. And so because of that, I think we're in a position now to continue our momentum and stay in the course with the outstanding staff we have, and then the members of this task force. And so for me, the big picture item or the big picture view for me is to continue the behind the scenes work that continues to push the agendas and those high valued recommendations forward. There are, you know, so many ideas and so many different perspectives, but we've all focused in our individual groups a direction of travel, and so we all have purpose. And for me, I think we continue to strive toward achieving that purpose that each individual committee has, and each individual person leverages their influence in their sphere to create that greater goal of a better North Carolina. And so I say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, but also thank you for the folks to the left and the right who've done their part in helping with that heavy lift.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump right in.
I knew you wasn't gonna leave me hanging. I knew you wasn't, brother.
You know I couldn't leave you hanging. I couldn't leave you hanging. So I want to first off thank everybody present and not present for the hard work that went into these recommendations. It is not easy. I want to say that even though these recommendations have come out and we brought forth these recommendations, that the fight for implementing these recommendations in the criminal justice system, this is the true battle. This will be the uphill battle. So I am thankful for Senate Bill 300, even though it was give or take. Some of the provisions in there, I would have particularly hoped they wouldn't be changed, and they was changed. Also, the HB 536, the duty to intervene, that bill I'm particularly happy about. But where I feel we could go forward now, excuse me, is a lot of bills that was filed, like HB 625, criminal sentence reduction reform bill. That was pretty much stuck in rules, I believe now, or didn't make it anywhere. I would like to see some of the provisions took from this bill and maybe reintroduced if possible. And I know these are some of the questions that I should have asked the legislative committee about, but I didn't think about it to the end and kind of where that was at. But I would like to see that, as well as HB 697, the Prison Resource Repurposing Act, about giving individuals parole and maps. I would like to see those particular provisions, which are now stuck in the Rules Committee, I'm pretty sure somewhere, maybe some of those taken out and reintroduced as well within this short section. But also I would be remiss if I did not say, being on a task force, we have to be proactive, but most importantly, we have to be reactive as well. Because just like it seems like we're fighting for criminal justice reform, it is individuals that are going to be fighting for reform not to take place and for the system to stay the same. And so racial equity cannot be introduced into the system if the system still stays the same, and it is what it is. And so with that being said, HB 560, which is a public safety reform bill, but this bill in particular will expand warrantless searches to over 36,000 individuals on post-release parole, their vehicles and their homes, without even having to have a reason directly tied to their supervision. But also it will remove the industrial commission from overseeing property claims and make it extremely hard for individuals incarcerated to get back into the criminal justice system and get their grievances heard. So it is things like this that we must be proactive on. And I feel like as individual stakeholders, we all possess a lot of power, but collectively we possess a superpower. And so we must come together collectively to be reactive to certain things that are introduced, as well as being proactive, like introducing different legislation. And so like next year, what I would like to see are kind of the recommendations that we didn't pretty much hit on. And I got a list of them, y'all, so y'all bear with me. But so I'm gonna go through it. But I would like to see some of these enacted, and I don't know exactly what's going on in each committee. And I would like to be more present in these committees coming up and kind of get an idea of what's going on in a sense of direction, just to look in it, but also just to weigh in my opinion. But some of these recommendations tailor slightly pretty much educational campaigns towards the Sheriff Association and the North Carolina Association of Police Chiefs. This is what I was thinking about, just educational campaigns. Recommendation number 12, de-emphasize drug possession. This will be extremely important coming up for us to really do educational campaigns surrounding this, but also improving consent to search requirements. And also this will require legislative assistance as well. 18, encourage citations and summonses in lieu of arrest. I think this is extremely important that we do education sessions surrounding these, but also for the Conference of District Attorneys. 71, deprioritizing marijuana-related arrests and prosecutions. This is something that we must look into. 90, establishing working groups led by district attorneys to review and approve every habitual felon charging decision. This is extremely important that we establish or help them establish these working groups to look at individuals who are charged with habitual felons. Because we know this status is really used, this charging is really used, particularly disproportionately of those who are Black and brown. And so I don't want to leave that out, and I definitely want to highlight that. And to DPS, who stakeholders are part of this group. And so I don't know if new, congratulations if you do see this, Secretary Buffalo, Deputy Secretary of Buffalo DPS. I don't know if he will be a part of this task force as well, but I know we have DPS stakeholders involved in the process. And so for them also in recommendation 108, increase funding for mental health services and programs in the prison system. This is extremely important. I definitely don't want to forget about individuals who are currently in the carceral state and going through the carceral state. We must continue to raise the flag and try to bring about equity, particularly in that institutional part of the criminal justice system. And so that leads into recommendation 109, increase the due protest protection for people accused of disciplinary offenses. I definitely do not want to forget about that. And as far as when legislative, things we can enact within the legislative committees is 36, improve local civilian oversight boards. I would definitely do not want to forget about that and pretty much look back into that. 46, strengthen the ongoing development of statewide law enforcement accreditation programs. If we could get the whole North Carolina law enforcement agencies accredited with North Carolina accreditation program, which I know is currently being developed, that will be extremely important. Why? Because it lifts individuals in different departments to a standard that they have to follow. And so this right here will set the floor, not the ceiling. This will be the floor, the bare minimum that they have to follow. So I think this is extremely important. 47, mandatory worn body camera footage for all law enforcement agency. And we know that this will go through legislation, but this is going to take finances. And we know we did some type of body camera provision in SB 300, but it wasn't everything that we wanted. And so I definitely want to make sure we wrap it back around and look at that, but also decriminalizing possession of marijuana up to a half an ounce, eliminating civilian initiated criminal charges, establish the Second Look Act. These are extremely important, y'all, that I want to just wave the flag again that we circle back around to. And I know it's going to take a lot of hard work, but I have a few more as well. And I'll be just emailing those out to everybody, y'all, that I pretty much want us to take a look back at. And I look forward to hearing y'all opinions. Thank you.
No, thank you. It is enormously helpful to hear you're highlighting the issues that you've highlighted. So thank you. Does anyone else want to speak at this time? Like I said, this is not our last opportunity to be addressing this, but I wanted to get people to start thinking about it.
So this is Tally, and just like Kerwin and Sergeant Garden and Henderson, I come sort of with the heavy responsibility of having a whole community of folks, and certainly the disability community in North Carolina cares deeply about what's happening here, but it's also involved in systems change of its own, really trying to move North Carolina from a system that was built in the 1800s around institutions to a 21st century system of real freedom and independence for people with disabilities. And I wrote an article recently just about sort of what I've learned from this task force and what I've seen this task force that really has lessons for all of us who are involved in systems change in North Carolina, is that you as chairs, Justice Earls and General Stein, really looked at this as not just a legislative issue, because it's so easy just to think that we just need a law. And yes, we just need a law, but we also live in the real world, and that's just one of the ways in which change is possible when we're trying to change a system that was developed hundreds of years ago, that has so many different issues of bias and discrimination and just ways of doing things that need to be really questioned. And when it's about life and death, when it's about people's liberties, when it's about racial equity, these are hard. And so the fact that you as chairs and this task force said, we're not going to just do this to the General Assembly. Yes, that's a critical component of this, but the governor has power, the executive branch, the agencies have power, the local communities have power, that we have to tell the story through data, that we have to be able to communicate what we're doing, and that the judiciary has a role here. And I think that's been really critical for where we are at halftime. And I think all of us feel like at halftime, we are behind. We have a lot more work to do, but that we have made progress, that we can be proud of sort of what we put on the field. I think we're very worried about the end of the fourth quarter, because we're not going to be where we need to be. And so we've got to be thinking about sort of how this work continues while we try to continue to get the recommendations that Kerwin did a good job of just laying out in the next sort of year. But how do we really continue it? And so part of what my hope is that we can really be thinking about the system, and how do we continue to engage the system in a constructive way? How do we really engage DAs who have so much power and so much responsibility in our local communities? How do we engage judges? How do we engage chiefs of police and sheriffs? And of course, our local communities, our individuals who have such diverse opinions on these critical issues. How do we keep the momentum going? And so, my hope is that we really can have concrete steps forward, but we can also really look at this as how do we really develop that long-term systems change that it's going to take to really make a difference here in North Carolina. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. These have all been enormously powerful and helpful comments. I have to cut us off because we have members of the public who are also here to address us. But I want, again, all this has made me excited about our next opportunity to do some planning. And for those of you who didn't speak, we will get you engaged at that point as well. But I think there were some nodding heads around the folks who did speak. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney General Stein to moderate our public comment session.
Thank you, Justice Earls. Yes, we've been benefited throughout this process by hearing the perspective of North Carolinians, and we have the opportunity today to hear from a handful of folks who will be speaking for 2 minutes. And Ellen, I don't know if you're going to have the clock up just to help people know when their time is coming. There we go. And the first person who is speaking is Chantal Stevens.
Chantal, I'm promoting you right now to a panelist. There we go.
Am I there now?
We hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantal Stevens, and I am the Executive Director of the ACLU of North Carolina. I appreciate the opportunity to share public comments with the North Carolina Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. And listening to the presentations, I recognize the hard, good faith work of many members of this task force. Every member of the task force has certainly contributed dozens of hours of your personal time to this effort, and have generally been accessible to my colleagues at the ACLU, even when our feedback has been critical. I urge this task force, lawmakers, and other elected officials to advance the adoption of these recommendations with the urgency that is demanded by this moment and the current state of affairs. Addressing systemic inequity within the criminal legal system is not another normal policy debate. It is a civil and human rights emergency. In September, the Prison Policy Initiative released a report that shows more people per capita are incarcerated in North Carolina than in any other country in the world other than the US. In our state, 617 people per 100,000 are incarcerated. That number is higher than the 562 in El Salvador, 552 in Turkmenistan, 515 in Rwanda, and 510 per 100,000 people in Cuba. This task force has heard and reported on the unjust and racially inequitable ways our state's criminal legal system regularly dehumanizes, exploits, and harms North Carolinians. The declaration that incarceration in our state is a human and civil rights emergency cannot be dismissed as hyperbolic. This is a crisis, and change is necessary. Just as we must recognize that the severity of our current situation is not just another policy debate, we cannot dismiss barriers to legislative action as normal partisan differences. There is solid support for significant reform from both Republicans and Democrats, but most of these recommendations will never be adopted unless elected officials are willing to challenge the influence wielded by powerful interest groups that routinely undermine and inhibit progress. Failures by elected officials to criticize and publicly admonish the obstructive efforts of these special interest groups is negligent. When the North Carolina Conference of District Attorneys single-handedly derailed HB 424, legislation that would have eliminated juvenile life without parole, members of the Legislative Black Caucus publicly chastised them in a letter that stated, and I quote, "In both its statements and actions, the conference has failed to take seriously the urgent calls for reform in North Carolina's justice system. Instead,"
Ms. Stevens, I apologize, but you've exceeded your time. Are your remarks in writing?
They are.
Could you please send them to us, and then we will circulate them to the full task force?
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you for your comments. All right, Joe Johnson.
Can you hear me at all?
We can now. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Good. Well, my comments are relatively short because I was actually following one of the recommendations that I saw on the list of that was being presented. And my question was simply, there was something pertaining to getting authorization, getting a written consent to searches. I gather it's because, and I assume this has to do more with in vehicle stops where a search officer may ask to search or may not ask to search, but search a vehicle, and the situation gets escalated. And that was a proposal, a recommendation that these searches would have to require written consent by the person being searched. I didn't quite know how that was going to be done, but I was questioning whether or not the legislators were even going to entertain this particular recommendation. And as a consequence, I was concerned, and I've not been able to track of the 100 or so recommendations that have been put forth, where they are. I mean, whether they just were dismissed or whether there's progress being made. How do we go about advocating for any of them that we think ought to be made into law? So just looking at that one particular one, I was just trying to get some feedback in terms of how do we go about pursuing this particular, this one is just an example, but how do we go about moving the needle at all in terms of getting these items put before the legislature and get some feedback as to whether or not they acted on, dismissed it, or just where we are on it? Is there some feedback mechanism that I am missing that I just don't have at this point?
I think what we'll do, Mr. Johnson, if it sounds okay with you, is I'll have somebody on the TREC staff follow up with you to give you specific information. There has been work done on that issue, but we'll have someone follow up.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, the next speaker is Kathy Greggs. Kathy. Kathy, we see, yeah, there we go.
All right, wonderful. Actually, my name is Monique Edwards. I am a board member for Fayetteville PAC, stepping in for Kathy Greggs.
That's fine.
Wonderful. So as a board member and representing the organization, I want to discuss as our public comment relates to the fact that the Racial Justice Task Force, we are looking for the Racial Justice Task Force to make a pivot. We are seeing people come in on public comment quite often, making recommendations about what we're not seeing and what we would like to have changed and added, but the pivots are not being made. One of the pivots that has been discussed publicly, because our organization had a racial injustice week, which we featured on Zoom and Facebook Live for the week of September 12th, because we wanted to discuss the things that were missing from the Racial Justice Task Force. One of the things that was missing is a discussion around immigration. It is not possible to deal with these matters around racial injustice in the state of North Carolina and not tackle immigration. Whenever people who are Black and brown and poor get into the hands of law enforcement, immigration is one of the things that we are finding that people are having their rights violated, and we want those things addressed. So we are asking and demanding that the Racial Justice Task Force add a measure around immigration to this discussion. Also, we are asking that the Racial Justice Task Force add eliminating qualified immunity in the state of North Carolina and making changes around these things. One of the things that continues to happen is the court's jurisdictions for qualified immunity is described as a balance between holding officers accountable and the cost it has to society and its violations. No one is discussing the fact that there are lawsuits that are had across this state that are involving officers around misconduct. We cannot continue to have these discussions and we're not talking about the fact that you want to protect law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, DAs from frivolous lawsuits, but no one is discussing the lawsuits that are coming out from the public. The city of Raleigh just released a document that states that $2 million had to be paid out to 13 men who were wrongfully arrested for drug charges. There are other pieces of evidence that you can find during our Racial Justice Week that we presented to the public where people are having their rights completely trampled on, but the only resolution to most of this is to file a lawsuit. And the Racial Justice...
I hate to interrupt you, but again, you've exceeded your time. Hey, are your remarks in writing? And if so, we would most certainly welcome your sending them in.
Okay, I'll send them in. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Daniel Bose, I believe, is next.
Hello?
Yep, we hear you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Bose. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the ACLU of North Carolina. I will spend the majority of my time finishing the statement of Chantal Stevens, but I did just want to note, one thing that Mr. Wells said, and I haven't personally worked with Mr. Wells, but I've heard really good things about the way he goes about his work. I'll use his analogy about the halftime, and I would say that what the advocates are worried about, many advocates, is that that the second half isn't going to be any better than the first half, and then it's going to be sort of the same old thing because there's no real recognition of who y'all are playing against. It's not Republicans. There was plenty of energy at the legislature that was bipartisan, but it kept on running up against the Conference of DAs. And so I would appreciate just much more attention to that, or, you're going to be in the exact same spot that you're in next year come this time. But to finish Ms. Stevens's comments, failures by elected officials to criticize and publicly admonish the obstructive efforts of these special interest groups is negligent. When the North Carolina Conference of District Attorneys single-handedly derailed HB 424, legislation that would have eliminated juvenile life without parole, members of the Legislative Black Caucus publicly chastised them in a letter that stated, in both its statements and actions, the conference has failed to take seriously the urgent calls for reform in North Carolina's justice system. Instead, the conference, on behalf of its elected members, its member district attorneys, has doubled down in support of a broader range of unnecessary policies that disproportionately harm people of color. End quote. It is disappointing that North Carolinians still haven't heard that same criticism from Attorney General Stein or Governor Cooper. Further, inaction resulting in crisis levels of incarceration that deprive people of freedom, liberty, and life should be viewed as a form of violence. In closing, I appreciate the time you've allowed me today and for this group's consideration of how to prioritize the task force recommendations during the next legislative session. However, I fear that the transformational changes that North Carolinians deserve will never come to fruition unless our elected officials muster the political will and courage to stand up to the powerful special interests that seek to maintain our existing criminal legal system that harms real people and families and tears at the very fabric of our society. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our last speaker today is Jamie Lau.
Good afternoon, AG Stein and Justice Earls in the task force. My name is Jamie Lau. I'm here to speak about Recommendation 95, which speaks to the governor's clemency power. Henderson Hill asked, what can we do and how can big things be done through executive power? This is a place where big things can be done. The Juvenile Sentence Review Board is a great start, but only applies to 300 eligible people as opposed to the more than 28,000 people presently incarcerated by North Carolina. The necessary actions for Recommendation 95 does not include an understanding of the policies applied by this governor in his clemency office. The recommendation calls on the governor to provide emergency attention to applications for clemency and commutations for parole eligible people who would have been released years ago under structured sentencing. The governor's clemency office categorically excludes parole eligible people from clemency consideration, undermining the recommendation and calling into question the sincerity of these efforts by the governor for ignoring this recommendation. It's understandable that the task force doesn't know this policy because the governor's clemency office does not have transparency with respect to the clemency policies it applies. The website and reliance on the website is misplaced because it doesn't appear to have been updated by this administration. For example, Montoya Dante Sharp is listed there as seeking a sentence commutation. His conviction was vacated on August 22nd, 2019 by the Honorable Judge Brian Collins. Necessary actions on Recommendation 95 must include calling on the governor to 1, consider parole eligible people for clemency consideration, and 2, greater transparency from his office with respect to the policies being applied to those under consideration. Finally, I want to say sentence commutations are not a radical idea. This is a place where our system has gone backwards. Prior to 2000, it was a common occurrence, and since Michael Easley was elected in 2000, commutations have all but disappeared. We need to move forward and make this change. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lau. Justice Earls, I hand the mic back to you.
Thank you. And let me add my appreciation for everyone who has spoken during our public comment session. It is enormously helpful and valuable. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come in person and be with us. So through the miracle of Zoom, I am really thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce to you a speaker who's going to finish our meeting today by telling us about efforts in Texas. And I, for one, am just incredibly impressed and inspired by Anna Yana's career. And she is currently the interim director of the Harris County Justice Administration Department. She's going to tell us what that department does and the efforts that they have been engaged in and the ways that she has moved the ball forward towards racial equity in the criminal justice system. But I do want to give you just a really brief background because her career has been incredible. So Anna was born in Mexico, immigrated to the United States at age 10. She worked as a domestic worker with her mother until she entered college, but she has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, a master's degree in public administration, and a PhD in policy and planning in education administration. She focused her dissertation on the school to prison pipeline. So her educational background is incredibly well suited to the work that she's been doing. I met her first when she was in a role that she had for 11 years as executive director of the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. So a group of bringing together the community to work with the Texas legislature to reform the criminal justice system in Texas. She's also been in philanthropy. So she, for almost 3 years, was with the Public Welfare Foundation. She moved back to Texas and working in the community as policy director and director of community relations with Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis. Anna has been working, it's been her career, her life's career to work on these issues. And so I am just thrilled, Anna, that you are willing to be with us today and share with us the work that you're doing. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Justice Earls, anytime you, I cannot say no to you, number one. And I'm so glad that all of these conversations and everything that I've been hearing from each and every single one of you just fuels my, that fire that each and every single one of us have. And sometimes it gets dimmed because of the challenges that we face, right? And you do all of this work and you try to build coalitions and bring people together, and then things don't quite go as well as you would like. And then all of a sudden you're like, why am I doing this? And so today, listening to all of you was just yet another example and reminder for me personally about how if it was easy, it wouldn't be called struggle. And that's what we're in the business of. We are in the business of moving the narrative, moving the culture. And in order for the culture and the narrative to move, you have to move people. And it takes all types of people to get to implementing the amazing recommendations that this task force has put together. And so I'm just inspired. I'm fired up. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Just a little bit of context. Harris County is big. Harris County is big. We got about 5 million people. And our jail, unfortunately, in Harris County is over capacity, over 9,000 people. All right. And we, there's a lot of challenges. We have natural disasters that we're still trying to catch up in, like people are still trying to fix their homes. People are still, the courtrooms have not been fully operational, right? Like many other jurisdictions, you're seeing an uptick on crime in certain types of crime, okay? And then we also are under an O'Donnell consent decree, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, is making sure that just because you don't have any money, money shouldn't have anything to do with whether or not you're safe or not. And so Harris County historically people could not afford to bond out. And so they stayed in the jail for a really long time. O'Donnell, there was a consent decree, and now we're trying to implement all of the recommendations from the consent decree. Okay, so lots of moving pieces. And we have in Texas, as you'll know, the legislature could be somewhat, it can be a little challenging to get some of these reforms passed. Okay, it can be a little challenging, and so when you are faced with the obstacles of we work really hard, we have this recommendation, we go ahead and go to the Capitol, and then things don't quite go as well, then you have to ask yourself, well, where else can we modify the changes, right? And local, it is so important. The local communities are so important. Okay, so for example, in Harris County, 45 representatives of the Texas House of Representatives are from Harris County. So if you have out of the 150 state representatives, so if you have policy recommendations that people in Harris County are interested in, then those members in the legislature will, because what do they want to know? What do people in the legislature want to know? It's like, what do the people that support me say about this? What impact does it have in the community? You have a lot of different interests trying to pull their attention. So the more information that you have that's contextual to what they care about, the better chances you have of passing, legislation. Now, this is nothing that you don't already know. You're doing it. You're trying. You have an incredible coalition, and so impressed with all of you. But one of the things that is the most important piece, not just the local level, but the state level, is the data. And so I'm going to just kind of share with you, and I don't know, Sam, if you can share I'm
going to share my screen.
So yes, so this is one of the things that I learned, and I wish that when I was doing this legislative advocacy back in the day, when it was popular to have more and more and more prisons in Texas, right? It wasn't about closing them down, shutting them down. It was more like, how many can I have in my neck of the woods? Because it was good economic development, more jobs and things like that. I wish we would have had the type of data that we currently have now. And I just, the judge wanted me to really talk, if there was one critical component that you could say is probably the most powerful tool to addressing the inequalities, the historical inequalities, and advancing practices, it would be data. Now, if you would have told me that 15 years ago, I would be like, who's going to really pay attention to data? But let me tell you, people do pay attention to data. Practitioners who are supposed to implement the reforms and the solutions pay attention to how their colleagues are doing in comparison to them. They pay attention to, the media pays attention to them, right? Various constituencies pay attention to it. So our department, and I skipped probably like the first question, which is, what does your department do? Our department was created 2 years ago. And it was with the intent of researching, identifying solutions, framing those solutions based on equity and fairness and justice. And you'll have the link to this, so you can play around with the website. But basically, out of the 254 counties, which Harris County is one of them, there wasn't one entity that looked at the whole the Harris County criminal justice system as a whole, and that looked at what policies are working, what policies are not working, what are other jurisdictions out there doing differently, what are some of the recommendations that can be, that can come out of this, so that we can address safety and justice and fairness and equity. And so that's basically what our role is. So now let's go back to the data piece. So Commissioner's Court, which is our body, the body that basically funds the courts and the DA and the defense and all of the various programs within the county, give us reports. So for example, what would be the best use of model report? And so we'll do an assessment of 102 model use of force policies nationwide. And we're actually going to be releasing our findings next month. So I'm excited about that. And then we'll go over, and then we'll meet with members of the community. What do you think about this? What is your approach? And then we'll put it together. Now, we don't have a carrot or a stick. Now, what does that mean by that? We are an independent research, and we cannot tell law enforcement what to do. We cannot tell the DA. We cannot tell elected officials what to do. But what we can do is through data and analysis and making it very easy for them to look at, this would be a model policy, and lots of one-on-one conversations, right? We can get people to start thinking, this is how we would benefit. This is how my team would benefit if we implement these types of policies. Okay. So Sam, if you can click on the jail population statistics dashboard. This is something that was the primary. This baby is came from our sheriff. We have an incredible sheriff, Ed Gonzalez, who really wanted to make sure that the public knew the extent to which, like the immense system within the jail. So him and his team put together lots of hours to put together a dashboard, right? And it's constantly being updated. You see the jail population, you see the average, you see the median, you see the gender, the demographics. A lot of information is here, and it's been extremely helpful within all of the conversations. So this is an example of the power of transparency and having data and how it can move people to make specific changes. Now, in Harris County, we have an incredible backlog, okay, in terms of court cases moving. We actually right now, and it has gotten a little bit better, because in June, the backlog was 95,393. I'm gonna say that in the thousands, 95,000, right? Like, that's a lot of people waiting for their case to be disposed of, waiting for their case to be addressed, right? A lot of survivors of crime waiting for what's going on with the cases, right? Right now, as of September, it got to 94. Okay, so you can imagine, because we're still recovering and navigating the public health crisis, which you guys are also navigating, right? We've had to make a lot of investments on how to assist with the backlog situation. So that's our primary task right now, is figuring out how we can assist the system actors to get rid of the backlog, right? If you can go back to the data again and go to the second one, the traffic stop demographic dashboard. So let me just give you an example. Commissioner's Court gave us a report to look at racial profiling data. So what we decided to do was not just write a report about the extent to which racial profiling exists within Harris County, but to do a dashboard that includes every single county, not just Harris County, but every single county. So now, if I am somebody who lives in Anderson County, I can compare Anderson to Harris County, right? And then you look at the arrest, the physical force incidents, the search, the racial profiling reports. And we've also made recommendations on how to make it easy for the public to know how to file complaints if there's racial profiling. So we actually made a lot of recommendations that are now a couple of the law enforcement agencies in Harris County, the Sheriff's Department, one of the constables that has been a strong partner of ours, Jerry Garcia, he has already taken on those recommendations to put it on his website to make it easy for people to take a look at this. So you see, this is the power of, you get a request, here you go, here's the research, but then you have to make it live. So how do you make it to where people are interested in seeing the results? Well, we want to go ahead and make a dashboard. Here's the information that we have. And then we have one-on-one conversations with the respective members of the law enforcement community on this particular case. And then those who choose to go ahead and make the recommendations will, and those who don't, but at least they have the data so that they can take it from there. Let's go back to the other dashboard, if that is okay. This one, oh, I'm sorry, the first, yes, so there's the court appointment dashboard. This one was fascinating to us. We got a request from Commissioner's Court to find out how many judges were actually using the public defender versus not, and how many of them used appointment attorneys versus not. And so we were able to get this data, and I don't think that, for the most part, I genuinely don't believe that the judges, given the workload, knew exactly the percentage, right? Like, what is their percentage? And then they started seeing the percentages. And so this has been a really good tool for them to see, okay, this is how I'm appointing, how much are we utilizing the public defender office? How much are we utilizing the private attorneys? And you do it by judge, you see it by court, you have misdemeanor, you have felony, you have calendar year, so you can see the trends, you can see the progress, right? And so this was really eye-opening for everybody, really, just to see the trends and the tracking and all of that. Let's go back to the next one. Thank you so much for helping me. The Harris County Indigent Defense Dashboard. This was just this. We just posted this, like, I want to say maybe 30 minutes ago on our website. This one is the money. This is how much money is being spent on appointment of counsels and the vouchers. So you can see how it's fully transparent. You can see as many years as we had access to the data for. We also write down guides. We create guides to tell the public, to show the public how to utilize these dashboards, because oftentimes you make a report, nothing happens, and then that's it. So we try to partner with the community as much as possible locally, and we have a body similar to this task force. But I'm going to tell you, your work has blown us away. The way your committees, the PowerPoint presentations, I'm going to take what I've learned from listening to all of you, and I'm going to say this is, it's the power of the committees, the power of the committee. So we're in the process of reinstating our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. Right now we have 45. No, how many members do we have? We have a lot of members on the council. We have a lot of members of the council, and it can be a little challenging. And at some point, I would love to touch base with the lessons learned, Anna, on this outside of this call, because what I see is the power of the committees, the research, the time, the energy that is being putting in. So I am inspired because we're in the process of reinstating ours, and we're putting together recommendations based on best practices. And we have a committee, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council now, and we have a committee specifically focused on the equity component. And we are in the process of doing reports on looking at the extent of which racial and ethnic disparities exist throughout the whole, like from arrest all the way to disposition, the causation of those disparities, and the solutions of those, the solutions and policy recommendations that can be adopted locally. So that is one of the things that we're really working to completing. And we also have one on looking at the non-punitive responses to homelessness, substance abuse, violence, poverty, the programs, how much it would cost, and how we can beef up those programs within Harris County. I can go on and on about all the work that we're doing, but I got to tell you that whenever it seems daunting, and I say this to the speakers as well, because I myself used to sign up to speak quite a bit when I was, running the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. Everybody's role is critical to this, right? You have reports, you have recommendations. Sometimes things make it in there, other times things do not make it in there. Do not despair. And sometimes it will take various sessions. I remember it would take me 3 sessions to get some bills passed. And the session here in Texas is every 2 years. And consistency and persistence and determination and outworking everybody is what's going to get you there. And having the data and reminding yourself that every single right that we all enjoy was not given to us. Somebody fought for it, somebody struggled for it, and we owe it to the communities that we represent, the men and women who are meant to implement these policies as well, because I'm going to get to that in a little bit. We owe it to what we are trying to get towards, to be consistent and to continue to modify our practices, right? Oftentimes we put a lot of effort into what we do, and people don't tend to care about the effort. They tend to care about the results. But I'm here to tell you that you all know how hard you work. You all know the hours that you put in, and you're not going to give up, because that's why you're here as a body, as a committee. And the issues that you are trying to expose, and the issues and the recommendations that you're trying to push forward in terms of just making it better for people, deserve everything that you all have to offer. And so, I just wanted to say that, Judge Earls, because I know it can be daunting, and it can be, you're never going to please everybody. And it's really hard to get everybody's perspectives, but you just keep at it and keep working. And then the final thing I will say is, I thought when I was an advocate, I thought the hard part was just passing a law. And we got to a place where we would average 23 laws per session, because we worked on everything in the we worked from indigent defense, police accountability, reentry, sentencing, and not including budget writers. Now, you all know how hard it is. It's okay to pass a bill, but you know how hard it is to get money for the implementation. That's like another monster trying to get those things through the legislature, right? But what I can tell you is that I realized that the work is not over once you pass the laws. You gotta make it easy for the men and women to implement it. You cannot create unfunded mandates, which oftentimes, I have to admit, I was doing, because I wasn't thinking about the men and women on the ground trying to, wait, we have this new law. What does this mean? And how are we going to navigate the changes, right? We had some departments, some of the police departments that didn't even have computers. And here I am, you need to do X, Y, and Z, right? So you got to meet people where they're at. And these are all humble lessons learned that I got, okay? You got to meet people where they're at. You got to make it easy for them. So then as I was starting to get, as we were starting to get these bills passed, we would also create implementation primers, samples of those policies on how to make it easy, to the point that people can just copy and paste into their policies, right? Resources. And right now in our department, we've gotten a couple of policy requests. One of them is the U visa. I don't know if you're familiar with the U visa certification, when you have somebody with an immigration status and they have been a survivor of crime, and they need to be certified whether or not they have actually been a survivor of crime. Because there isn't a standard way of doing this, we actually looked at creating a standard, and we looked nationwide on how to be, and we partner with the advocates who are assisting the survivors of crime. And we actually, instead of just doing the report, we actually did a policy. So here's what it would look like. And once we're done, we're actually going to do this in the next Commissioner's Court. We'll send it over to you guys, because I think you guys would like it. And it's best on, maybe you guys can use it. I don't know, but I think you got to make it easy for people. You got to make it easy for people to utilize. And then if you want them to collect data, you also need to take into consideration the systems, the technology that they use, because that could be a really big challenge. Wow. Is the standard of just the flow of data and information can be a challenge, right? But the wind.
Anna, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
You have been so incredibly generous with your time, and it's incredible to see the work that you're doing, and so inspiring. I want to just give our task force members an opportunity before we have to wrap up, just to see if anyone has any questions for you. I have a lot, but I can give you a call later. So I want to see if any of our task force members have any reactions, have any questions for you.
I could just ask, we've had a lot of conversations around the Conference of DAs, and I'm sure that you have, I just love your sort of insights into, in addition to what you've already said about just sort of building coalitions and getting, and how y'all have done that in Texas.
Well, it can be a little challenging. Okay, you have so much of it. We have several district attorneys right now. So, for example, there's a DA there's a DA in Dallas by the name of John Crusoe, who used to be a judge. There's a brand new district attorney in Austin. There's a brand new district attorney in Austin, and what I've noticed, and I don't know if it works for you in your state, but the association, the District Attorneys Association per se, is not supposed to make a position on legislation. They're supposed to just be an added like a resource, because individual elected district attorneys can have their own opinion about things. Is that sort of like how it is with you guys? Sort of?
We're different.
No, maybe.
We're different. Individual DAs can have their positions, but the Conference of DAs will take a position based on their executive committee.
Okay, so So in that sense, I think that, what's really important in terms of building coalitions is basically figuring out who is going to be, if you want an association to take the position, is basically figuring out who are going to be the ultimate deciders of who's going to say yes and no in taking those positions, and letting them know how it's beneficial to them and their processes, meeting with them, listening to them, and collecting the information as much as possible. When I was an advocate, I would have individual conversations with individual DAs, and sometimes some DAs would show up on their own and say, actually, I don't agree with my colleagues who don't want to support this. I actually would want to see that differently. So I don't know how much help I can be, just because it's under a different context. You guys have a different process.
Yeah, but thank you. I think that is an important perspective, is just because there's that there's going to be differences of opinion based on different DAs' experiences.
But I think the more work you do locally, the better. Because they will listen to their local communities, and the ministries and the groups, and how it impacts their communities. I think that would be so much of this is local.
Thank you.
Question. You might not have been on the line when we were talking a little bit earlier about how we actually do have a model policy and information sheet project that the task force is working on. And so we're trying to create a lot of go-bys that hopefully people will take and use. And so really happy to hear that that's been an effective strategy for you. Wondering if you have advice for us on outreach and how to use those deliverables once you've developed them. And are you really having stakeholder by stakeholder meetings? What other strategies have you employed to get the word out about what you've developed?
So before we release any report, so like let's say a law enforcement related report. We reach out to all of the law enforcement folks, and we have one-on-ones with all of the enforcement folks, and we say, this is the data that we found, this is what we're thinking about, this is our methodology that we use. And some conversations go well, other conversations do not go as well. And a lot of the conversations that do not go as well are more rooted on, why are you guys telling me what to do? Commissioner's court's responsibility is only to fund, not to make policy. But we work very closely with Commissioner's Court, and we are a department created by them. We still have to comply with the report gathering. So I would say that the thing that has worked the best, even in the most challenging conversations, is being very clear about why are we doing this? What is the final outcome that we're trying to do? And then listening to them about what their challenges are in terms of implementation, and listening to them about what they would need to get past those challenges, right? And including members of the community. So we have the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council has the committee that is composed of incredible people that want to see equity throughout, and you have conversations with them as well and say, what do you see in the community? How would this policy make it better for you in the community? So a lot of it is, is gathering best practices nationwide, while you're also listening to the local context and their perspective of it, because ultimately they're going to be the ones implementing. So you need to know what the challenges are going to be for them. And then also trying to incorporate the perspectives of the people that want to see this modification even go further. So in the U visa, which is a good example, we submitted the report. It didn't go as far as Commissioner's Court wanted it, and they gave it back to us and said, you need to make sure that all of the advocates who have been working on this, trying to get U visas, are incorporated. I'm like, cool, we'll go back. So we went back to all of the advocates. They beefed up the sections, and then we went back and started having those conversations about these are our modifications, right? Not everybody's gonna, our thing is not everybody's gonna do every single component that we're recommending, but it's at least creating a baseline. It's creating a baseline for a best practice that we can strive towards, right? And at least it's information that when maybe there's better times to fully implement, right? It will be there. It's something to give you to work towards. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of like our approach.
It does. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid that we've already gone over our time limit for the meeting, but this has been an incredibly rich conversation. I wish we did have more time, but thank you so much, Anna. And
thank you.
You are incredibly inspiring, and this has been enormously helpful. So thank you. And so I just want to thank all of our task force members who've hung in with us. And Attorney General Stein, are there any closing comments you want to make?
Just appreciation to Dr. Correa. Definitely an inspiring presentation. We appreciate what you're doing in Texas, and to all the task force members for your continued persistence. Just like she advised us, this stuff isn't easy. When it's difficult, it means it's more hard work, and you all are putting in the work every week, every month. And we are so grateful. And just to hear the reports from each committee has been incredibly bolstering to me. So congratulations all, and let's keep at this work. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. We'll be seeing you soon.